Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of Cari Lea Farver. Cari Lea Farver was born on November 30th, 1974 in Macedonia, Nebraska, USA. After going through many relationships, she raised her son Maxwell alone. Cari Lea loved her son very much. Cari Lea spent a month in bed due to severe depression. Her mother, Nancy Rainey, helped take care of her son Maxwell. The complicated relationship with Maxwell's father along with the difficult living conditions caused Cari Lea, a young woman of 20 years old, to fall into an unstable psychological state. Doctors diagnosed Cari Lea with bipolar disorder. People with bipolar disorder often have two opposite psychological states. One moment they can feel overly excited, energetic and friendly, but then they can fall into a state of depression, frustration and helplessness. This disease causes them a lot of difficulties in daily life. However, in the early 2000s, Cari Lea's doctor found an effective treatment that allowed Cari Lea to live a normal life. In the fall of 2012, Cari Lea received a lucrative job offer in nearby Omaha, an opportunity she couldn't refuse. Cari Lea accepted the offer. However, her son, Maxwell, was in middle school and didn't want to change his familiar surroundings, so Maxwell decided to stay with his grandmother in Macedonia. One day in November 2012, Cari Lea met Dave Kropa at the auto repair shop where he worked. When Dave looked at Cari Lea's Ford Explorer, he realized that he really liked this woman. Cari Lea was showing Dave something inside the car, and they stood close to each other, and there was a little tension. Not long after, Dave and Cari Lea went on a date. Cari Lea went to Dave's house. A while later, a woman named Liz called Dave a lot and texted him. Then Liz went to Dave's house to pick up something he had left for her. Dave explained to Cari Lea that Liz Gollier was the first person Dave met online in 2012. Liz, born in 1975 in Michigan, initially told Dave that she was not looking for a serious relationship because she was a mother and needed to spend most of her time with her children. In Dave and Liz's relationship, they had few topics to talk about, and their relationship was mainly physical. After a while, Liz began to worry about what Dave was doing when she was not around, as well as who he was seeing. Dave often reminded her that they were in an open relationship and that she should not worry. He also insisted that Liz was free to date other men. However, Liz was not happy with this and began to bother Dave more and more. Liz also felt jealous of Dave's children and their mother, Amy, because she could not understand the close relationship they had after the breakup. Eventually, Liz's actions upset Dave, and he decided to break up with her. Cari Lea sympathized with Dave, as everyone had relationships in the past, and Cari Lea did not let that affect their relationship, but Liz was clearly upset to see a strange woman in Dave's house. Liz, feeling that Dave was increasingly distancing himself from her, wrote text messages, emails, and called Dave. However, Dave would not stop seeing Cari Lea or anyone else because of Liz. 2 weeks after moving to her new job, Cari Lea began dating Dave. Cari Lea and Dave began spending more time together. Dave felt comfortable with Cari Lea around. Cari Lea said that she was not looking for a serious relationship, but just wanted to enjoy the good times together. In December 2015, Liz was shot. Liz probably guessed who it was. Luckily, the wound was not fatal. Liz thought, "This can't go on any longer, I have to do something." At 9:45 a.m. at work, Dave suddenly received a text message from Cari Lea. In the message, Cari Lea expressed her desire to live with Dave forever. The content of the message made Dave feel confused and surprised, because he did not understand the reason for Cari Lea's sudden change. Because before, they had discussed and agreed that both of them would not rush into a binding relationship. Dave gently replied to Cari Lea that he was not ready for this big change. Cari Lea's response was very unpleasant. When Dave returned to the apartment, he found that all of Cari Lea's belongings that she had brought were gone. This made him think that Cari Lea had left him. On the same day, Cari Lea deleted him from her Facebook friend list. Although it seemed like everything was over, it was not. Dave began receiving a series of text messages and emails from Cari Lea, which were full of curses and threats to ruin Dave's life. The messages were numerous and all of them were rude. In addition, Cari Lea did not show up for work. The strange messages from Cari Lea were not only sent to Dave, but also to her mother and 15-year-old son. In May 2013, Cari Lea posted a lengthy post on her personal Facebook page, in which she wrote, she had answered enough questions to prove to everyone that she had had enough. You can either believe that she was a girl, or leave her alone. She quit her volunteer job and she was fed up with people giving her a hard time. She just didn't want to go home right now. She was a grown woman, and if she wanted to leave home, she had every right to do so. Sorry for hurting everyone. Cari Lea then remained absent for a while. Her mother realized something was wrong when Cari Lea missed her own birthday, Max's birthday, and other family celebrations. Finally, when her father passed away. After a while, Liz Gollier began receiving messages from Cari Lea. In those messages, Cari Lea criticized and insulted Liz, even threatened Liz to stay away from Dave. To understand Cari Lea's strange behavior, Liz contacted Dave. He said he was also in a similar situation. Cari Lea sent him many messages and emails, in which Cari Lea accused Dave of all kinds of wrongdoing, called him a liar, and promised to avenge the pain he had caused Cari Lea. Gradually, the messages from Cari Lea became more threatening, with confusing content and grammatical errors. Cari Lea's mother insists that her daughter is not a hot-tempered person and has always been very careful in writing letters and documents. Cari Lea pays attention to spelling and presentation. Is her bipolar disorder relapsing and developing into something more serious? After Cari Lea's confusing actions, all the evidence points to Cari Lea having psychological difficulties. Liz and Dave often receive hundreds of text messages and emails, even when they are together. Their phones constantly buzz with messages, which makes them both uncomfortable. Although they continue to date, Dave feels uncomfortable around Liz. She becomes more and more demanding, despite always insisting that Liz is fine with their no-strings-attached relationship. In January 2013, Dave found Cari Lea's car in his front yard. Dave called the police and reported the incident. The police came to check the car and found no suspicious signs. The police then turned the car over to Cari Lea's parents. Cari Lea continued to text Dave and Liz. Cari Lea even started sending pictures of Dave's children and threatening to harm them. As time went on, Cari Lea continued to stalk them. Liz became increasingly jealous, made Dave angry and tired of the situation, and finally decided to end the relationship with Liz. In August 2013, Liz reported a fire at her house, which killed all of her pets, including a snake, a cat, and 2 dogs. Liz told the police that Cari Lea had repeatedly threatened her through text messages and emails. So she suspected Cari Lea of starting the fire. The police seized Dave and Liz's cell phones. Someone damaged Dave's auto repair shop and threw a brick through the window. Dave felt threatened, so he bought a gun to protect himself. After a while, Amy Flora, Dave's ex-wife, also began receiving threatening messages from Cari Lea, because Dave often spent time with the children and met Amy. The police became suspicious for reasons that were hard to understand. Dave had only dated Cari Lea for less than 2 weeks, but had been following him and his ex-girlfriends for 3 years. Meanwhile, Cari Lea's family had not seen her for 3 years, and were trying to find her, using every method possible. In 2015, these efforts paid off. Police officers Ryan Avis and Jim Doty volunteered to investigate Cari Lea Farver's disappearance. However, they found no evidence that Cari Lea was alive. It was unusual for an adult to pack up and leave without spending any money. No one had seen her, and no one had heard her voice. This was very strange. With the assistance of Anthony Kawa, digital forensics administrator at the Pottawatomie County Sheriff's Office, police analyzed the contents of Dave and Liz's phones. In 2013, Anthony reported that Cari Lea Farver had sent more than 50,000 text messages and 15,000 emails to Dave over the course of 3 years. Anthony also said that those impersonating Cari Lea were becoming more sophisticated in their operations, trying to hide their IP addresses and real identities. It seems that someone knew what they were doing and had access to various computer programs. In December 2015, Liz Gollier contacted the police to report that she had been shot in the leg outside her home. She determined that the attacker was not Cari Lea but Dave's ex-wife Amy Flora. Furthermore, Dave had a missing gun that Amy may have taken. It is possible that Amy was behind Cari Lea's disappearance. A clue in the investigation indicates that people associated with Dave were being harassed. It is possible that Amy, having had a difficult life after breaking up with Dave, the father of her children, decided to take revenge and eliminate all rivals, and the relationship between Dave and Amy was still quite good. The children together brought them closer, and Cari Lea clearly hindered their reunion. The police quickly questioned Amy, but surprisingly, Amy had an alibi. She was not at Liz's house when the shooting occurred, and this was confirmed by several people. Because there was no hard evidence, Amy was not arrested. Experts processed the data from Liz's cell phone and discovered important information. Anthony discovered fake email addresses with different variations of the name Cari Lea. In addition, Anthony found an application that Cari Lea used to schedule messages to be sent at certain times. This could explain why Liz and Dave received messages from Cari Lea at the same time. Anthony began to suspect Liz Gollier. The answer became clear when Liz's fingerprints were compared to those found on the steering wheel of Cari Lea's car, and they matched perfectly. The culprit was revealed. The killer has been here for years without anyone knowing. The case needs to be solved as soon as possible. The police want to catch Liz red-handed, so they plan to frame Liz. The police decide to make up a story about believing Liz, with Amy still being the main suspect. Liz takes the bait. Liz is extremely happy because she can finally get rid of another rival who is hindering Liz's happiness with Dave. Soon after, Liz gives the police an email that she says is from Amy. In the email, Amy admits to kidnapping Cari Lea and includes many details about the incident. The confession in the email states that Cari Lea was stabbed in the stomach or chest before being dumped. In addition, the email contains information about Cari Lea's car and home address that no one else knows. The police say that Liz has provided information that only the real culprit would know. The email messages clearly indicated that the crime had taken place in a car, so the police decided to re-examine Cari Lea's car. After the police removed the upholstery and fabric, they discovered blood stains belonging to Cari Lea, who had gone missing. Liz had created fake messages on Cari Lea's behalf without raising suspicion. According to the investigation, Liz Gollier dated both Dave and a man named Garrett. Garrett lived at the IP address identified as the source of the messages under Cari Lea's name. When talking to Garrett, the police discovered that he had been in a long-term relationship with Shanana Gollier, known to many as Liz. Garrett had invited Liz to live with his children after a fire. However, their relationship became complicated and strained when they lived together, with Garrett having to care for Liz's children while she was away. Garrett was surprised to hear from police that Liz had spent 40 to 50 hours a week impersonating the missing woman Cari Lea. Liz's room was a mess, but no significant evidence was found. However, police did find several cell phones and electronic devices in the last room she stayed in. In late December 2016, Shauna Gollier, known as Liz, was charged with first-degree murder. Liz's attorney, James Martin Davis, hopes the case will fail because Cari Lea's body has not been found, the murder weapon has not been found, and Liz has not pleaded guilty. There is no evidence to prove that Cari Lea is dead. The defense team decides to hold a new trial, with Liz's guilt decided by a judge. Electronic evidence was presented along with physical evidence. The prosecution asserted that the amount of blood found on the passenger seat of Cari Lea's car was consistent with Liz's confession. Police analyzed the memory card that Liz had been using when Cari Lea went missing. The memory card was on Dave's tablet. Police recovered deleted images, including a photo of a human foot with a Chinese symbol tattoo. The foot belonged to a man who had died many years earlier. There was also a tattoo that Cari Lea's mother identified as Cari Lea. The photo was used to confirm Liz's guilt. The judge found Shauna Gollier, also known as Liz, guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced her to life in prison without parole. Additionally, Liz was convicted of arson in August 2013, a fire that not only destroyed her home but also killed her pet. Liz was sentenced to an additional 20 years in prison. She is currently incarcerated at the Nebraska Correctional Center for Women and maintains her innocence. Cari Lea's son Maxwell has followed in his mother's footsteps by becoming a computer programmer. Maxwell graduated from the University of Iowa with a degree in software engineering and data science and is married. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Samantha Josephson. Samantha Josephson was born to Seymour and Marcy Josephson in Princeton, New Jersey, and grew up in Robbinsville, New Jersey. She majored in political science at the University of South Carolina. She plans to attend Drexel University School of Law with the goal of specializing in international law. Samantha received a full scholarship to Drexel University and a partial scholarship to Rutgers University, and hopes to pursue a career in international law. Samantha was a member of the Alpha Gamma Delta sorority and had the opportunity to study abroad in Barcelona. While in South Carolina, she also visited Madrid and Paris. Samantha had a boyfriend named Greg. Samantha and Greg communicated regularly through text messages and phone calls every day whenever possible. Even though Samantha was about to enter law school, they still planned to build a future together. Greg planned to move in with her and support her. However, everything changed on Friday, March 29, 2019, when Samantha did not return to her apartment. On March 28, 2019, Samantha decided to hang out with her roommate and friends in Columbia, South Carolina. Although her boyfriend, Greg, was unable to come along, the group visited several bars before ending up at the Bird Dog Bar in 5 Points, a popular place for students to socialize. Samantha was hanging out with friends, but she kept texting her boyfriend, Greg. She wanted him to drive to Columbia to be with her. However, they had plans to meet up the following weekend, so Greg decided not to go to Columbia with her. He kept in regular contact with Samantha. Around 2 a.m., Samantha left and returned to her apartment alone. She called an Uber to get home. Samantha was waiting for an Uber. While waiting, she talked to Greg on the phone at around 2:04 a.m. and told him she was on her way home. She had used Uber many times before to get to and from bars. Shortly after requesting a ride, a car pulled up at the curb where Samantha walked up to the car, realized it wasn't hers, and then turned around to return to her spot on the sidewalk. She was wearing an orange shirt and black pants. After some time, a black Chevrolet Impala pulled up in front of Samantha. She said goodbye to Greg, assuming the Impala was her ride. She opened the door, exchanged a quick word with the driver, and got into the back seat. The car sped off immediately. Meanwhile, the actual Uber she had ordered arrived at the pickup location, but the driver couldn't find Samantha and eventually canceled the request and left. The black Chevrolet Impala circled the area several times before targeting Samantha. This behavior suggests that the driver was aware of the college students who congregated on 5 Point streets after the bars closed, waiting for the car to leave. Meanwhile, Samantha's boyfriend, Greg, had been tracking her movements using the Find My Friends app to make sure she got home safely. He noticed that she was moving in the opposite direction of her apartment, which initially did not raise any concerns because he thought she might be visiting a friend. However, when he texted her to check in, he received no response. Greg tried calling Samantha, but she didn't answer. He sent her multiple texts, but they showed up as delivered, not read. This meant Samantha wasn't reading his messages. Her phone's location stopped sharing, which surprised Greg because it had never happened before. He thought maybe she had left her phone in the Uber. Concerned, Greg contacted her friends and roommate to see if they had heard from her or if she had made it home safely. However, no one had any news about her whereabouts. Greg decided to rest, hoping Samantha would show up tomorrow morning. The next morning, Samantha was missing. Her roommates filed a missing person report. Her boyfriend, Greg, drove 2 hours to Columbia to help search for her. Shortly after the report was filed, a group of turkey hunters found the body of a young woman in a wooded area in New Zion, about 65 miles from 5 Points. The hunters immediately called 911 after the discovery, and the local sheriff's office quickly dispatched deputies to the scene. The body was later confirmed to be Samantha Josephson. An autopsy revealed that Samantha's body had more than 120 separate stab wounds affecting multiple areas, including her face, head, neck, arms, torso, legs, and feet. In an attempt to defend herself, her fingernails were severely damaged as she tried to evade a sharp object. Evidence suggested a double-edged knife had been used, and she had then been dragged into the woods. An autopsy revealed that her body contained only 20 milliliters of blood. Samantha had suffered severe blood loss. Police quickly obtained surveillance footage from the bar the night of the incident, which showed Samantha getting into a black Chevrolet Impala. The footage showed the car circling the block several times. Police discovered that Samantha had accidentally gotten into the killer's car, thinking it was her Uber. The Uber that Samantha had called arrived a short time later. However, when the driver realized that Samantha was not there, he canceled the ride and left. Police believe that the suspect may have used a childproof lock to lock her inside, as when the childproof lock is on, the doors can only be opened from the outside of the car, so Samantha would not have been able to get out at that point. A description of the vehicle was released to the public in hopes of identifying the perpetrator, and shortly after, police spotted a black Chevrolet Impala during a 3 a.m. patrol on March 30th while patrolling the area where Samantha was abducted. When the police stopped the car, the driver immediately jumped out and started running. After a short chase, he was arrested. When police checked his ID, they discovered that the man arrested was Nathaniel Rowland, 24, of New Zion. During a search of the vehicle, patrol officers discovered a child car seat in the back, surrounded by blood stains. This discovery prompted them to call for backup. As police suspected it was a crime scene, homicide detectives were called to investigate and conducted a thorough search of the vehicle. They discovered multiple blood stains on the passenger seat and in the trunk, as well as a bloody footprint on one of the rear windows. Samantha's cell phone was found on the floor of the car. Police later discovered that Nathaniel had tried to sell it to a pawn shop earlier that day, but he had refused their offer of $125 and left the phone in the car. Police also found that the child locks were activated, which Nathaniel had used to lock Samantha inside. Several cleaning products, including bleach, window cleaner, and antibacterial wipes, were found in the car. Nathaniel had cleaned his car, but there was still a trace of blood in the car. During questioning, Nathaniel repeatedly denied any involvement in the kidnapping and murder of Samantha Josephson, despite the overwhelming evidence against him. He maintained his innocence. Police searching Nathaniel's body discovered traces of Samantha's DNA under his fingernails. However, no DNA from Nathaniel was found on Samantha's body. Police pieced together the evidence and speculated that Samantha was the victim of a sudden and violent attack. The fact that the child-proof locks in the car were still active at the time of Nathaniel's arrest led them to conclude that he must have activated the feature as soon as Samantha got into the car. Nathaniel suddenly stabbed her multiple times with a double-edged knife. Taken by surprise by the brutality of the attack, she struggled to fend off the blows, which explains the multiple stab wounds to her hands and the severe damage to her fingernails. Samantha was attacked by Nathaniel, who scratched Nathaniel's hand, leaving skin cells under her fingernails as evidence. After the attack, Nathaniel drove to a remote road in New Zion and dumped Samantha's body in the nearby woods. Upon returning home, Nathaniel posted on social media, acting as if nothing unusual had happened. Nathaniel's neighborhood is minutes away from where Samantha's body was found. A background check on Nathaniel showed that he attended South Carolina State University in 2017. However, there is no record of him graduating, and it is unclear what job he was doing at the time of the incident. Nathaniel was previously arrested for assaulting and robbing a woman in October 2018. Police searched Nathaniel's girlfriend, Maria Howard's apartment in New Zion, where he was living. They found evidence in a trash can behind the apartment, including a sock and towel with blood stains on it, which belonged to Nathaniel. The blood was later determined to be Samantha's. Police also discovered a blood-stained white cloth, duct tape, bleach wipes with blood on them, and a double-edged knife with obvious blood stains. Tests later confirmed that blood found on the double-edged knife, bed sheets, car, and bleach wipes matched Samantha Josephson. Nathaniel was charged with kidnapping and murder. The trial took place. Nathaniel maintained his innocence despite overwhelming evidence against him. In the summer of 2021, Nathaniel's defense team argued that he was innocent, as there was no DNA of his on Samantha. Prosecutors countered Nathaniel's claim of innocence with a large amount of evidence gathered in the case. Key evidence included CCTV footage showing Nathaniel's car picking up Samantha in 5 points and driving away, as well as several incriminating physical pieces of evidence found in his car. Additionally, cell phone tracking showed that Nathaniel and Samantha's phones were in the same location at the time of the murder. Furthermore, Nathaniel lived near where Samantha's body was discovered. The prosecution presented 31 witnesses, including a person who saw Nathaniel cleaning the murder weapon, the pawn shop owner to whom he tried to sell Samantha's cell phone, and Nathaniel's ex-girlfriend, who claimed that her daughter had blood on her shoes after being in Nathaniel's car. After the murder, Nathaniel did not contact any witnesses to testify in his favor, and no members of Nathaniel's family came forward to defend him. Despite this, Nathaniel maintained his innocence and appealed to the judge. The jury deliberated for only an hour before returning a guilty verdict, and Nathaniel was subsequently sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Angie Hausman. On November 18, 1993, Angie Hausman, a 9-year-old girl from St. Louis, Missouri, disappeared after getting off her school bus just a few hundred meters from her home. Angie, born on February 18, 1984, had never known her biological father, as he had left the family before she was born. When Angie was 1 year old, her mother married a man named Ronald, and they had a son together. Angie got along well with her stepfather and adored her little brother. Angie was an easygoing child who always sought to make friends with those around her. She lived in a quiet suburb of St. Louis and attended an elementary school located just over a mile from her home. She usually took a bus from the nearest stop, and her parents felt relatively safe letting her go there alone, as the stop was only a few hundred meters from their home. Angie typically walked to the bus stop with neighborhood kids after school, and they were watched by several parents from their windows along the way. On the day of her disappearance, Angie finished school around 3 p.m. and took the school bus to her stop with a few neighborhood kids. They walked together towards their homes, but the other children lived closer to the bus stop, leaving Angie alone halfway. When Angie didn't arrive home after about half an hour, her parents began to worry. They went out and walked along the route between their house and the bus stop, talking to other kids from the same school and neighbors who usually kept an eye on the children. However, no one had seen Angie. Angie's parents and their friends quickly initiated a search, scouring the area along the route from the bus stop to their home. As darkness fell, they decided to call the police. Officers immediately joined the search, considering the cold weather and the recent attempted abduction of an 11-year-old girl in a nearby area just 10 days prior. The police used K9 units, which picked up Angie's scent near the bus stop, but lost it roughly halfway to her house, suggesting that she may have gotten into a vehicle at that point. Helicopters with thermal sensors were also deployed, but they found no trace of the girl or her belongings. On the first day of the search, no clues were found. By the following morning, the police sought assistance from the media. The police department was inundated with over 300 calls, necessitating the hiring of more than 20 additional officers, including closely examining Angie's stepfather, who denied any involvement and consented to a lie detector test. They also found Angie's biological father, who had never had any contact with his daughter, but had been observed driving by their house multiple times, watching Angie play outdoors. The FBI became involved on the third day, and the police department allocated even more officers to the investigation, realizing that Angie must have encountered something horrible. She just couldn't have survived on the streets in such cold weather. At one point, the police received a lead about a possible suspect. Someone reported a strange man slowly driving a blue sedan in Angie's neighborhood. His description matched the account of a girl who had narrowly escaped an abduction just 10 days before Angie's disappearance. Investigators decided to create a composite sketch of this person. It was featured in the news, and volunteers distributed thousands of flyers, but the identity of this man remained unknown. Soon, the girl's disappearance made it to national television, attracting even more leads. Police diligently examined each one, but none brought them closer to finding Angie. Due to the heightened attention to this case, psychics quickly got involved, calling Angie's home and sharing their alleged visions. One of them claimed that the girl was alive and even specified a location where she was being held, a large national park 25 miles from Angie's home. However, detectives paid no attention to their words. A $10,000 reward was also offered for any information about Angie's whereabouts, leading to an increase in tips. During the investigation, detectives uncovered a pretty disturbing fact. A few days before her disappearance, Angie told her teacher that she was planning to go on a nature trip with her uncle. The catch was that there was no uncle, and her parents had no idea what their daughter meant by that. Investigators considered the possibility that Angie might have known her abductor prior to the incident and referred to him as her uncle in the conversation with her teacher. However, they didn't find anything about this mysterious man in the following days. Detectives were unable to make any headway in the case until November 27th, 9 days following Angie's disappearance, when a significant breakthrough occurred. A hunter contacted the police after discovering a human body in the woods upon arriving at the national park. The police were met with a gruesome and disturbing scene when they reached the location. They found the body of a girl, completely naked, tied to a tree with her head fully wrapped in tape, leaving only her nose exposed. Handcuffs bound her hands. In close proximity to the site, a bag was found containing items that quickly led the police to identify the body as Angie's. The bag held her personal belongings, including notebooks bearing her name. The body was handed over to medical examiners, revealing even more shocking details. As soon as they removed the tape from her head, experts found a piece of underwear in her mouth. They also determined that the girl had died just a few hours before the discovery, meaning she had been kept alive for 9 days and then taken to this location where she froze to death. Experts had concluded that the victim had suffered numerous injuries and had been sexually assaulted. Forensic analysts carefully examined all items found at the crime scene and managed to find a fingerprint on the tape used to wrap Angie's head. They tried to find matches in the database and among several suspects, but it led to no leads. After the discovery of the body, the police dedicated even more resources to the investigation. Local residents were shocked by such cruelty and feared for their children, escorting them everywhere, meeting them at bus stops, and not letting them out of their sight for a moment. Just a few days after Angie's discovery, their concerns heightened even further. On December 1st, a 10-year-old girl named Casey disappeared. She lived in another town only 10 miles from Angie's house. Casey had asked her mother if she could visit her friends who lived just a few hundred yards away, but she had never reached their house. Casey vanished on the way, and the police couldn't locate her. Detectives began to fear that they might have a serial killer on their hands. They didn't rule out the possibility that the same person was behind both abductions, but they had no evidence supporting this theory. 10 days later, Casey's body was found in St. Louis. She was wrapped in 2 bed sheets and covered with a pink curtain, with the cause of death being multiple severe blows to the head. Detectives couldn't find any clues that would lead them to the killer. Moreover, they started to doubt that the same person who killed Casey was responsible for Angie's death. The nature of these crimes was noticeably different, leading them to consider the possibility of dealing with 2 different murderers in the same month. Detectives identified the man who had attempted to abduct a girl a few days before Angie's disappearance. He turned out to be 37-year-old Gary, who often came to St. Louis for work. He was immediately checked for involvement in the 2 murders, but the man had a solid alibi. He wasn't in the city during the disappearances of Angie and Casey. Although, during the investigation, he admitted to assaulting 4 other girls and eventually received a 5-year prison sentence. In February of the following year, detectives had found a breakthrough when they discovered Casey's body. Tire tracks were found nearby, and their photos were handed over to experts who determined that the tracks were left by a pickup truck widely used by a popular car rental company. Armed with this information, detectives interviewed residents in Casey's neighborhood, asking if anyone had seen a pickup from this company, given that these vehicles were covered with vibrant brand logos that were easily distinguishable from others. The detectives got lucky. One woman told them that she had seen the pickup from this company near her neighbor's house about a week after Casey's disappearance. Police quickly discovered that there was a woman living with her partner and brother. She claimed that none of them had rented such a pickup and they had no connection to this case. But detectives didn't rush to believe her. They obtained a search warrant for the house and found blood traces belonging to Casey in the basement, along with the murder weapon. Further investigation revealed that the woman's brother, Thomas, had rented the pickup. Initially, he denied everything, but when confronted with the existing evidence, he finally confessed. According to his account, Casey had knocked on his door, wanting to invite his nephews to go to the street with her. He invited her into her house, took her to the basement, and attempted to assault her. When she screamed, he struck her with a heavy object and covered the body with bed sheets. After the murder, Thomas went to work, and upon his return, his sister informed him that she had seen the body in the basement. However, she added that she didn't want to know what happened and demanded to get rid of it as quickly as possible. Casey remained in the basement for a whole week because active searches were underway, and Thomas was afraid to move her. When things calmed down a bit, he rented the pickup, took the body to St. Louis, and left it there. Thomas was eventually sentenced to death, but he died in prison from illnesses several years later. In connection to Angie's case, he denied any involvement, leading detectives to conclude that these crimes were indeed unrelated. The investigation hit another standstill for many months, with fewer and fewer leads coming in. Several years after Angie's murder, detectives faced another challenge: the expiration of the monetary reward for information, raising concerns about a decline in public assistance. However, an unexpected turn came in 2001 when a businessman in the community donated $250,000 as a reward for information on Angie's case. This generous amount of money, one of the largest at the time, led to a massive influx of tips for the police. But unfortunately, all of these leads proved to be dead ends. This continued until 2001, when detectives received a call from a prison inmate named Corey Fox, who confessed to over 10 murders, including Angie Hausman's. Detectives rushed to speak with him, and Fox recounted how he and his friend abducted her from the street, keeping her captive in his house for several days. Initially, the criminals planned to demand a ransom, but concerns about potential identification led them to choose murder. To the surprise of detectives, Fox provided many accurate details, such as tying her to a tree, even specifying that his accomplice was using her underwear as a gag. However, discrepancies arose when questioned about how they restrained her hands. Fox claimed they used plastic handcuffs, whereas in reality, they used iron ones. Detectives also found out that Fox couldn't have committed some of the murders he confessed to. Police concluded that he likely fabricated parts of his confession, possibly drawing information from extensive news coverage on Angie Hausman's case. In the summer of 2002, another event reignited attention on Angie's case. In a different area of St. Louis, an unknown man abducted a 6-year-old girl from her home and killed her. Police initially considered the possible connection to Angie's case, but it turned out otherwise. The perpetrator was apprehended just a few hours later. It was a neighbor who confessed during interrogation. Several more years passed until 2007, when detectives decided to revisit the case. Reviewing the documents, they noticed a peculiar detail. Shortly after discovering Angie's body, police noticed a parked car nearby, with a man named Roger Martin inside. When questioned about his presence, Roger claimed he came to the area for hunting. However, upon a brief inspection of his car, the police officer found no hunting gear. This led the new detective team to take a closer look at Roger, discovering his criminal record for offenses against children. Moreover, he had assaulted one of his victims near the location where Angie's body was found. Remarkably, all of these crimes occurred before Angie's death, and this information was in the database. But during that time, the police did not thoroughly investigate Roger, prompting the new detective team to start from scratch. Roger was called in for questioning. He denied any involvement in Angie's murder, insisting he was near the location by chance. Roger added that during the time the girl was left there, he was still at work, although the police couldn't confirm this alibi. Despite a 9-hour interrogation, detectives couldn't reach any conclusive results. They took Roger's fingerprints, comparing them with the one left on the tape from the victim's head. Experts determined they didn't match, leading to Roger's release. While the police refrained from ruling him out as a suspect, they lacked substantial evidence to hold him. There was no progress in the case until 2018, when the St. Louis Police Department formed a dedicated task force. The new detectives aimed to re-examine all existing evidence with significant advances in technology since '93, hoping to uncover new leads. The detectives focused on 3 key pieces of evidence: the handcuffs, tape from Angie's head, and her underwear used to silence her. Despite repeated attempts since '93, experts struggled to find the perpetrator's DNA on them. Undeterred, they decided to re-examine these items with modern technology. Firstly, they attempted to find DNA on the handcuffs, but it was quite challenging as they were almost entirely covered in the victim's blood. They then turned to the tape from Angie's head, encountering another issue. When they opened the box containing this evidence, they found that the tape had literally disintegrated over the years. Finally, they examined the underwear, despite having little hope for this particular evidence, as it had been in the victim's mouth for several hours, potentially erasing any foreign DNA. They pursued it as a last resort. Employing state-of-the-art technology, they meticulously inspected every inch of the underwear, and at last, there was a breakthrough. A tiny sample of unfamiliar DNA was discovered, sufficient for analysis. Experts confirmed the DNA belonged to a male, immediately uploading it to the FBI database. In such cases, it's pretty common not to find any matches, requiring additional efforts to identify the person. However, luck was on the detective's side this time. As soon as the DNA sample was uploaded, they received a full match. The DNA belonged to 58-year-old Earl Cox, who had been in prison since 2003. Cox had never come to the police radar regarding Angie's case, but his criminal history was substantial. Earl first landed behind bars during his military service in 1982 in Germany. He had a part-time job as a babysitter until 4 girls reported that he had sexually assaulted them. Earl received an 8-year prison sentence in the USA and was discharged from the Army. After serving only 3 years, he was released early and relocated to St. 4 years later, Earl was arrested again when 2 7-year-old girls accused him of sexual assault. Despite the charges being dropped due to insufficient evidence, his arrest violated the terms of his parole, leading to an additional year in prison. Upon his release in '92, he resettled in St. Louis, where his relatives lived. A year later, he seemingly abducted and killed Angie, but we'll delve into that shortly. In 2002, Earl faced another arrest for running a major anonymous internet platform where predators shared materials depicting child abuse. The FBI had been investigating him for a while, and Earl took the bait when an undercover agent posing as a 14-year-old girl contacted him. Earl expressed intentions to make her his slave, sent money for a bus ticket, and showed up at the agreed meeting place. Instead of a girl, Earl encountered armed FBI agents, resulting in his arrest. On his computer, they discovered 45,000 photos of child abuse, along with evidence that he was the mastermind behind the perverse platform. This information led to the arrest of 60 more individuals associated with the site, marking one of the country's largest operations against pedophiles. In 2003, Earl was sentenced to 10 years in prison, but when his term ended, a judge refused to release the offender, using a legal loophole allowing the detention of individuals deemed a serious threat to children. As a result, he remained behind bars, and in 2019, his DNA matched the sample from Angie Hausman's case. Detectives went to prison to speak with him. However, Earl denied his involvement and promptly asked for a lawyer. The police recognized that the man had little chance of winning the case in court, given the presence of his DNA, but they decided to try something else. Investigators reached out to Earl's lawyer, stating they would seek the death penalty for Angie's murder. However, if the perpetrator confessed, the prosecution would abandon the death penalty in favor of a life sentence. Apparently aware that he would likely lose the case, Earl agreed to the deal. Detectives returned to the prison, where he provided his version of events. It's worth noting that some parts of his story sounded outright implausible, but the crucial thing for investigators was the confession to the murder. Earl claimed that on November 18, 1993, he was driving through the area where his mother and sister lived. His car stalled in the middle of the road, and while he was trying to figure out what was wrong with it, a school bus pulled up and several kids got off. They all went into their houses, except for one girl, Angie. According to Earl, when she approached him, they had a brief chat, and he noticed she looked freezing. He offered her a ride in his car, and as he claimed, she agreed. He then took Angie to Burger King, fed her, and brought her to his home, where he sexually assaulted her for several days. After some time, he decided to get rid of Angie, took her to the location where her body would later be found, and tied her to a tree. Allegedly, she was still alive at that moment. Detectives doubted the truthfulness of certain parts of this story. Angie clearly couldn't agree to go anywhere with a stranger, especially considering she only had a short distance to walk home. Investigators also questioned the car breakdown in Earl's story. He claimed the car stalled, but as soon as Angie approached, the car surprisingly started again. More likely, the perpetrator noticed Angie and immediately decided to abduct her. He could have lured her into the car with some lies or even threats. It appeared much more realistic than Earl's version. Nevertheless, detectives obtained what they needed: the confession to the murder. In August 2020, he appeared before a judge who sentenced him to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Unfortunately, Angie's mother did not live to see this moment. She passed away from cancer in 2016. Her husband, Ronald, told reporters that Earl should have been tried for 2 murders because he held him responsible for his wife's death. After losing her daughter, she lost all interest in life and essentially died. As for Earl, his story didn't end with the verdict. The prosecutor wanted to review the case of sexual abuse involving 2 7-year-old girls, for which the offender faced no consequences, serving just a year in prison for parole violation. Police reached out to one of his victims, now an adult, asking her to testify against Earl. The man, already destined to spend the rest of his life behind bars, admitted his guilt, and he was sentenced to an additional 10 years in prison. After the sentence was announced, his victim spoke in court. She expressed that despite Earl's heinous crime, she would lead a happy and fulfilling life while he rightly fades away in prison. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Justine Valdez. Justine Valdez was born in 1993 in Aritao, a town situated 255 kilometers north of the Filipino capital Manila. She was the only child of Teresita and Danilo Valdez, also known as Tess and Danny. Justine attended St. Teresita's Academy, a Catholic secondary school in her hometown of Aritao. While Teresita and Danilo had moved to Ireland for work, Justine remained in the Philippines with family. In 2015, her parents were able to bring Justine to Ireland, and the family settled in the small village of Enniskerry in County Wicklow, near the Dublin-Wicklow border. After arriving in Ireland, Justine immediately began working, studying, and building a life for herself. She was extremely close to both of her parents and maintained constant contact with them when she wasn't at home. Justine was studying accountancy at IT Talat and worked 2 part-time jobs as a care worker and as a waitress in a cafe in the bustling coastal town of Bray. In November 2017, Justine began a relationship with Joseph Squire. Joseph later described Justine as being happy and active, saying she never got up to any mischief. She was way too innocent for that. He added that she was literally the most innocent person I ever met in my life, and I will never forget her. On May 19, 2018, 24-year-old Justine Valdez spent her afternoon with a routine she was familiar with. After completing paperwork for her residency permit, she went to the gym for a workout, wrapping up around 4:20 p.m. Justine then planned to head home, and her mother, Teres, sent her a quick text asking her to pick up some bread on the way. Justine obliged, making a stop at the store before catching the 185 bus bound for Bray, departing after 6 p.m. The bus dropped her off at the village of Enniskerry, a familiar stop near her rural home. From there, a 15 to 20-minute walk typically separated her from her doorstep. This journey, though not arduous for a young and active woman like Justine, became fraught with worry when she failed to return home. Teres, accustomed to Justine's punctuality and communication, grew increasingly anxious as time passed without word from her daughter. Calls and messages went unanswered, prompting Teres to venture out in search of Justine. She scoured the streets, stopping strangers to inquire about her daughter's distinct Asian features and sporty attire, which stood out in the crowd. Despite sightings of Justine disembarking the bus, her whereabouts remained a mystery. Teres's frantic search yielded no answers, leaving her with mounting fear and uncertainty about where Justine had gone and what could have befallen her on her seemingly routine journey home. With each passing moment, Teres's worry deepened, driving her to scour the streets for her daughter and any potential witnesses. Justine's disappearance left her mother in a state of distress, unable to find any trace of her daughter. In desperation, she reached out to the police to report the situation. Detectives promptly took her statement and initiated a search for Justine. At 5:20 p.m., Justine, still wearing her gym clothes, took the 185 bus from Bray to Enniskerry village, arriving at approximately 6 p.m. From there, she had a 15 to 20-minute walk until she reached home. It was a journey she would never have a chance to complete. Despite their humble beginnings, Justine's parents worked tirelessly to support her education and livelihood. Justine's parents worked as a gardener and housekeeper, respectively. Justine herself was known for her reliability, hard work, and dedication to her obligations. Given her strong ties to her family and her commitment to her responsibilities, no one believed she would willingly abandon her loved ones. Furthermore, her limited social circle and absence of typical teenage rebellious behavior made the idea of her running away seem implausible. Despite contacting all of Justine's acquaintances, none could provide insight into her whereabouts. At 24, Justine had outgrown any inclination for teenage defiance, remaining a steadfast and devoted member of her family until her sudden disappearance. Hence, the possibility of Justine running away was swiftly dismissed. She maintained an unwavering connection with her parents, updating them on her every move. On the particular day, she and her mother exchanged a staggering 63 messages, the last being at 6:24 p.m. when Justine alighted from the bus. As detectives diligently investigated leads to determine Justine's whereabouts, a crucial tip emerged from her co-workers. Shortly after Justine's bus stop, authorities were notified of a disturbing incident. A female motorist reported witnessing a man forcibly pushing an Asian woman with dark hair, dressed in sportswear similar to Justine's, into the trunk of a black Nissan Qashqai. The woman recounted her harrowing experience, driving past the suspicious scene with her 12-year-old son and promptly alerting the police. Shortly after, another motorist passed by and witnessed a similarly distressing scene. This time, an Asian girl was seen seated in the back of the vehicle, tapping on the window in evident fear. Initially perplexed, the driver later discussed the incident with his wife. Upon returning home and realizing the gravity of the situation, he promptly contacted the authorities at 7:20 p.m. to report the suspected kidnapping. Another concerned driver also contacted the police, citing a suspicious Nissan vehicle driving erratically approximately 6 kilometers from Enniskerry. Patrol officers swiftly responded to the location provided by the initial female caller. There they discovered Justine's broken cell phone and a bag of bread abandoned on the roadside, raising alarming concerns for her safety. Armed with this disturbing evidence, investigators concluded that the kidnapper had targeted Justine as she made her way home from the bus stop. After initial attempts to conceal her in the trunk were thwarted by Justine's resistance, the suspect forced her into the back seat before driving off to an unknown destination. The suspect's black Nissan was promptly added to the wanted list, prompting an extensive search effort involving patrol cars and helicopters. However, the night made the search more difficult, resulting in no result. When day broke, the search resumed, with detectives revisiting eyewitness testimonies and narrowing down potential suspects. One individual, 40-year-old Mark Hennessy, emerged as a person of interest due to his resemblance to the kidnapper's description. Police officers visited his residence, only to find his wife Nicola unaware of his whereabouts since he left for a drink after work the previous day. This information only raised more suspicions surrounding Mark, prompting investigators to delve further into his background. Mark Hennessy appeared to be a pillar of the community, widely regarded as a devoted family man, husband, and father to 2 young daughters, the youngest born just 8 months prior. Hailing from a respected family, he resided in an affluent neighborhood alongside other young families. Mark's occupation as an estimator on construction sites provided a stable income for his family, and he boasted a clean record with no prior brushes with the law. Despite his seemingly impeccable reputation, law enforcement remained cognizant of the unsettling reality that individuals may conceal darker motives beneath a veneer of respectability. With this in mind, The police officers visited the bar that Mark had frequented the previous night to gather more information. The staff confirmed his presence, but noted that his stay was brief. He had left after consuming a single beer and watching some soccer. Unimpressed by the excitement of the match, Mark's return to the bar around midnight appeared to be marked by visible agitation and unease. Upon reviewing the bar's CCTV footage, investigators corroborated the staff's accounts, observing that Mark's stay was approximately 10 minutes before he departed at around 5:40 p.m. Engrossed in a phone conversation, he quickly made his way to his car and drove off, concluding his visit around 11:30 p.m. Interestingly, upon leaving the bar, Mark actually returned and engaged in a conversation with an acquaintance at the doorway before leaving once again. Detectives found themselves puzzled by Mark's whereabouts between 5:40 p.m. and 11 p.m., and the nature of his activities during this time remained a mystery. By this point, investigators had acquired CCTV footage from the bus route Justine had taken, and upon examination, a disturbing revelation emerged. Mark's black Nissan had trailed the bus just 30 minutes after he left the bar, shadowing its movements throughout the day. This revelation heightened suspicions surrounding his involvement, especially in relation to Justine's disappearance. The search for Mark's car and the missing girl persisted unabated, with growing certainty that the two incidents were intertwined. Mark emerged as a prime suspect in Justine's abduction. Despite efforts to track his cell phone, which intermittently powered on and off, Mark managed to evade detection. He made a solitary call to his wife, informing her of his continued absence. Even when confronted by his own family, who pleaded with him to surrender to the authorities, Mark remained obstinate and promptly departed. Mark's parents relayed this encounter to investigators, prompting renewed efforts to locate him. However, Mark remained elusive, staying a step ahead of law enforcement. In a bid for public assistance, the police issued appeals through the media, urging anyone with knowledge of Justine, Mark, or his car's whereabouts to come forward. One listener heeded this call, spotting a similar Nissan Cash car on the road with a familiar-looking driver behind the wheel. Sensing an opportunity, she followed the vehicle to Cherrywood Park, where she observed the driver closely before promptly notifying the authorities. Upon arrival, the responding police officers encountered a man seated behind the wheel, his body covered in blood. Despite their attempts to coax him out of the vehicle, Mark remained obstinate, brandishing a knife in a menacing manner. Faced with imminent danger, the officers were compelled to resort to the use of firearms, resulting in a bullet striking Mark in the shoulder. Removing him from the car, they discovered him conscious, though uncooperative. As they commenced their examination of the vehicle, their hopes of locating the missing girl were dashed, as Justine was nowhere to be found. Persistent questioning yielded no answers from Mark, who maintained a steadfast silence. Medical personnel promptly attended to him, and he was swiftly transported to the hospital, where doctors battled to save his life, clinging to the hope that he might divulge Justine's whereabouts. Tragically, it was revealed that the bullet had tragically ricocheted, fatally striking Mark in the head. Subsequent investigations unearthed the grim truth. The blood adorning his face and body belonged to him, and he bore several fresh stab wounds on his arm and neck. Law enforcement speculated that, consumed by fear of exposure, Mark had chosen to confront his fate with the knife, conveniently stashed in his vehicle. When the police finally apprehended him, there was a sense of disappointment pervading the air. Despite successfully locating the suspect and his vehicle, their primary objective of finding the missing person remained unfulfilled. However, a note was discovered, its contents obscured by bloodstains. Through the haze of crimson, officers managed to discern the words "sorry" and "Puck's Castle," hinting at a potential lead to Justine's whereabouts. Though hope flickered dimly, they persevered in their search, while the anxious parents fervently prayed for their daughter's safe return. A meticulous search unfolded in a wooded expanse south of Dublin, guided by the cryptic clue near the castle. Initially, Justine's purse containing her identification documents was unearthed. Then, on May 21st, a grim discovery was made: the lifeless body of Justine Valdez. Autopsy revealed the horrific truth that she had been murdered on the very evening of her abduction, succumbing to manual strangulation. Tragically, evidence of sexual assault further compounded the brutality of her demise. However, amidst the sorrow and despair, another unsettling revelation emerged. Toxicological analysis unveiled the presence of prohibited substances in Justine's body. This posed a puzzling enigma, as there was no clear explanation for the origin or purpose of these substances. Conversely, the analysis found that Mark had ingested a significant quantity of these substances, further deepening the mystery surrounding the tragic events. It emerged that Mark had recently spiraled into alcohol and substance abuse, likely contributing to the presence of these substances in Justine's system. Concurrently, his domestic life had deteriorated, with frequent spats between him and his spouse over his substance abuse and mounting debts. Investigations revealed Mark's engagement with the dating app Tinder, where he actively pursued interactions with various women, including flirting with female patrons at bars. Further incriminating evidence emerged when Mark's DNA was found on the victim's body, reinforcing the police's suspicions about his involvement in Justine's abduction and subsequent murder. Detectives pieced together a disturbing narrative. The murder was driven by sexual motives, and Justine became an unwitting victim in Mark's sinister pursuit of prey. Spotting her while following a bus, he seized the opportunity in broad daylight, brazenly abducting her from the street without hesitation, even in the presence of multiple witnesses. A thorough examination of the victim's and perpetrator's phones revealed no prior acquaintance or communication between them. Their paths had never crossed before, with no mutual connections to bridge the gap between victim and assailant. This grim revelation underscored the tragic randomness of Justine's fate and the calculated brutality of Mark's actions. Upon closer scrutiny, the detective's initial assessment underwent a significant shift. It transpired that Mark was intimately familiar with the route Justine frequently traversed, suggesting a premeditated nature to her murder. Far from a spur-of-the-moment act, Mark had been meticulously observing her movements, biding his time until he deemed it opportune to strike. The day of the abduction marked a deliberate departure from his usual routine, as he purposefully positioned himself at the bus stop, tailing Justine's every move until he pounced on her unsuspecting victim. The revelation sent shockwaves through the local community, unaccustomed to such heinous acts in their otherwise tranquil neighborhood. Many rallied around the grieving family, offering solace and support during their time of immense loss. At the farewell ceremony, poignant tributes were paid as white balloons soared into the sky, symbolizing hope amidst despair. Some attendees donned pink t-shirts emblazoned with Justine's likeness, a touching homage to her memory. Ultimately, Justine's family chose to lay her to rest in her native Philippines, seeking solace in familiar surroundings. Though they initially remained abroad for a period, they eventually returned to Ireland in 2021, seeking a fresh start and new opportunities. Relocating to a different city and pursuing new occupations offered a chance to heal from the harrowing memories that haunted them in their former home. Mark Hennessy exhibited the characteristic behavior of a serial sex offender. They concluded that although his crime seemed spontaneous and unplanned, he displayed the traits of someone who had committed such acts multiple times previously. In the early days of the investigation, it emerged that a man matching Hennessy's age and physical description had been harassing female passengers at train stations in South County Dublin over several years, including exposing himself to them. However, there is no definitive proof that Hennessy and the serial harasser were the same person. We will likely never know, as Mark Hennessy's secrets died with him. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. Min Lin and Yoon Lee Lin's love story began in the late 1980s during their college years at an Australian university. Both were natives of China, who had separately emigrated to Australia to pursue higher education. Yoon Lee through an exchange program, and Min, who was 2 years her senior, remained in the country for a professional internship. They met in a university corridor, which they later recalled as a case of love at first sight. They shared common roots and dreams, and both felt like outsiders in a foreign land, but were united by their aspirations to start a new life in Australia. After graduation, the couple married and settled in the picturesque and peaceful suburb of North Epping in Sydney. Their love grew into a large, close-knit family, deeply connected and devoted to one another. In August 1994, they welcomed their first child, a daughter named June Brenda Lynn, who was commonly known by her middle name Brenda. Their son Henry was born in 1997, followed by the youngest, Terry, in 2000. Entering the 2000s, Min and Yun Lee decided to start a business venture, opening a small newsstand. Their dedication transformed this modest beginning into a thriving news agency with its publishing arm on Rose Street. The Lin family's business prospered, enabling them to enjoy a comfortable lifestyle with a spacious home, a luxury car, and prestigious private schooling for their children. Min focused on business matters, while Yun Lee dedicated herself to homemaking and nurturing their children. In their community, the Lins were well respected for their diligence, kindness, and charitable work. They were known as exemplary, caring parents who avoided conflicts. Brenda, their eldest, was exceptionally beautiful and an excellent student with a compassionate nature towards animals. The boys, Henry and Terry, were energetic and sports-loving, sharing a passion for soccer. The siblings shared a strong bond and were almost inseparable. As the Lin family settled in Australia and their financial prosperity grew, they began inviting relatives from China to visit, live, or even stay permanently. In the early 2000s, Min's parents were the first to move to North Epping, living nearby and helping with the children. Min's father also worked in their newsstand on weekends. A few years later, Yun Lee's parents also moved to the Sydney suburb, with Min and Yun Lee buying them a small house. Yun Lee's sister, Irene, came to live with the Lins, assisting with household chores and the children. By this time, the Lin family business was generating substantial income, reportedly nearing $1 million annually. Their venture wasn't just a shop or publishing house. It had become a local hub where people gathered to read and discuss news over coffee. Towards the end of 2007, Min Lin's younger sister, Kathy Lin Nai, and her husband, Lian Bin Robert, also moved to Australia, seeking better opportunities in the bustling city of Sydney. They had visited relatives in Australia before and briefly lived in Melbourne, but this time they were determined to settle in Australia permanently. Robert, a former successful ENT doctor in China, decided to switch careers and try entrepreneurship. The Lins opened their own restaurant in Sydney, investing all their savings, but the business struggled and soon closed. Subsequent attempts to open a cafe or snack bar also failed, as Robert lacked business acumen and financial management skills. Eventually, Robert and Kathy moved to North Epping, closer to family. The Lin and Robert families were bound not only by kinship, but also by strong friendship. They saw each other almost daily, stayed in constant touch, and often gathered for family meals. Their last such gathering was on the evening of Friday, July 17, 2009, at the home of Kathy and Min's parents. Unbeknownst to them, this would be their final reunion. The Lin family home was the scene of a gruesome massacre on the morning of July 18th. The Lin family's shop remained unexpectedly closed, surprising their regular customers. The shop, which had operated 7 days a week for years, showed no signs of opening, with no notice or warning on the doors. This unusual occurrence raised concerns among the customers and neighboring shop owners. One of them, after several unsuccessful attempts to reach Min, called his sister Kathy to inquire about the situation. Kathy was both surprised and alarmed, knowing her brother had never closed the shop for a day without prior arrangements, often having their father or father-in-law cover for him. She tried calling Min and then his wife Yun Lee, but to no avail, as her calls to their home phone also went unanswered. Worried, Kathy and her husband Robert decided to visit Min's house to ensure everything was all right. Arriving around 9 a.m., they noticed the family car in the driveway and found the front door unlocked. but no sign of the homeowners. The house was eerily quiet, and calls for the family members went unanswered. The house appeared undisturbed, with no signs of forced entry. Kathy, repeatedly calling out for her brother, ascended to the second floor. Upon opening the bedroom door of Min and Yoonli Lin, she screamed in shock and horror, staggering back at the gruesome scene before her. The room was completely covered in blood, across the floor, walls, ceiling, furniture, and curtains. The lifeless body of 43-year-old Yoonli Lin lay near the bed, mutilated beyond immediate recognition. In the adjacent room where 39-year-old Irene, Yoonli's sister, slept, the scene was equally ghastly. Irene lay dead in her bed, her face a bloody pulp. In the children's bedrooms, 12-year-old Henry and 9-year-old Terry had also been brutally beaten to death, their bodies lying in different corners of the room. Brenda, the 15-year-old daughter, had fortunately been away on a school trip the previous day and was not at home during the tragic night. The body of Min Lin was nowhere to be found, leading to a faint hope that he might be alive, possibly injured, taken hostage, or escaped. Kathy immediately called emergency services, but she was so hysterical from the shock that she struggled to convey what had happened. She screamed and cried into the phone, begging for medics to arrive quickly and try to save anyone they could. However, the first responders could only confirm the deaths of all the victims at the scene of the massacre. The morning after, a chilling discovery followed Kathy's frantic call to emergency services. Robert left to fetch the Lin parents, who lived about 10 kilometers away from the crime scene. The police and paramedics arrived within minutes, and what they encountered was immediately dubbed as one of the most horrific crime scenes they had ever witnessed. Tragically, it was too late for any member of the Lin family. Each had been killed by multiple blows to the head with a heavy blunt object resembling a hammer. However, the lethal weapon was nowhere to be found, leading investigators to conclude that the perpetrator had taken it with them. Min Lin's body was eventually discovered in his own bedroom, covered with a blood-soaked blanket. Like his family, he had been beaten to death in a similar manner. It appeared that he was the first victim, followed by his wife, her sister, and lastly the two boys. An initial inspection of the crime scene did not yield any significant clues or leads. The absence of the lethal weapon, combined with the fact that valuables and money were left untouched, indicated that the primary objective was the elimination of the Lin family rather than robbery. Initially, multiple assailants were suspected, as it seemed unlikely that one person could single-handedly overpower so many. However, evidence suggested that the children were awake and had desperately tried to escape during the attack, as indicated by blood stains and splatters throughout the house. Interestingly, all adult victims besides head injuries also showed signs of strangulation, possibly to minimize resistance during the assault. Identical bloody shoe prints were found in each room with a unique tread pattern, but the shoe brand could not be identified, only its size. No fingerprints were discovered, suggesting that the killer or killers wore gloves. At first, there were no leads or theories about the identity of the perpetrator, as family, friends, and neighbors unanimously stated that the Lins had no known enemies. The motive for such a brutal massacre of 5 people remained unclear. The time of the attack was established to be between midnight and 3 a.m. on July 18th. Brenda Lin, the eldest and now the sole survivor of the extensive Lin family, was on a school trip to New Caledonia at the time of the tragedy. She first learned of the horrific incident through social media and initially refused to believe that it involved her own family, hoping for some mistake. Her Aunt Kathy soon called her, confirming the dreadful news through tearful sobs. Brenda was quickly flown back to Sydney, where Kathy and Robert, her new guardians, met her at the airport. Brenda moved in with them as the Lin family home was sealed as a crime scene. The next day, a grief-stricken Brenda was brought to the police station for questioning. However, she could offer no new information, insisting that her family had no enemies or ill-wishers and had noticed nothing unusual before her trip. Following her family's death, Brenda became the heir to a substantial fortune, including property in the family business. However, being a minor and still in school, her legal guardians, Aunt Kathy and her husband Robert, were responsible for managing the estate. Brenda's grandparents also offered their support, but Kathy and Robert insisted on being her primary caretakers. Robert even threatened legal action if the elderly relative sought custody, arguing they were too old to care for a teenager. Eventually, the matter was settled amicably, and Brenda remained with her aunt and uncle. The Lynn's shop and publishing business, which had been temporarily closed, soon reopened under the management of the deceased, as Brenda was yet to take over the business operations. Robert also began actively reviewing the family's bank accounts, savings, real estate, and other assets. Investigation and theories experts repeatedly scrutinized the crime scene meticulously, documenting every detail. Despite their efforts, no concrete leads emerged. They deduced that the killer likely acted alone and entered the house quietly, suggesting either an unlocked door or the perpetrator having a key. The killer wore size 9.5 shoes with a distinct ornate tread pattern. The lethal weapon, believed to be a hammer, was never found in or around the house. The killer's use of gloves meant no fingerprints were left behind, and no foreign DNA was found, only traces from the 5 victims. A peculiar and significant detail was that blood stains were found on the doorknobs of each bedroom where the perpetrators occurred, indicating the killer's bloodied gloves touched them. However, there were no blood stains on the doorknob of Brenda's room, suggesting the killer knew she was not there. As one of Australia's most high-profile cases, the tragic incident was widely covered in the media, with no substantial evidence or suspects. Various improbable theories emerged, including rumors about the Lynn's alleged vast fortune leading to their demise, a robbery gone wrong, and even involvement of local Chinese mafia clans. These theories weren't entirely dismissed, given the area's history with a burglary gang, as the Lynn shop had been attacked months before the tragedy, and men had witnessed an armored car robbery a week before the fatal incidents, although the criminals wore masks and the men couldn't identify them. It was speculated that the perpetrator might have been eliminated as a potential witness. Months passed with the investigation at a standstill. None of the theories were substantiated, and no suspects emerged. The robbery theory was eventually ruled out as money and valuables were untouched, and the killer seemed to have a different motive, singular purpose to eliminate the household members. Additionally, the power was cut off in the house on the night of the fatal incidents, indicating the killer knew where the electrical panel was, as their familiarity with the house in total darkness suggested they had been there before and knew the layout, possibly even obtaining a key in advance, a crucial overlooked clue. While reviewing the perplexing case details, an investigator repeatedly listened to Kathy's emergency call, searching for any overlooked clue. Surprisingly, a significant hint was found in that recording. The recording captured Kathy's hysterical attempts to explain the situation, her words jumbled and interrupted by cries and sobs. At the end of the call, when the operator confirmed that emergency services were on their way, Kathy unexpectedly mentioned her husband's name, adding something in Cantonese, directly addressing him. This detail piqued the investigators' interest, prompting them to translate her words. It turned out Kathy was pleading with her husband not to leave her alone in the house. This was significant because Robert had decided to fetch the Lynn parents on his own, leaving Kathy at the gruesome crime scene before the police arrived. Robert's behavior seemed highly suspicious, as 5 people had just been brutally taken away from the house, and the killer could still have been hiding inside, making Kathy a potential target. Yet Robert appeared calm and simply left as if he knew nothing bad would happen to his wife. After several unproductive months, the police finally identified a primary and sole suspect, Robert. It was discovered that he had a key to his brother-in-law's house, which his in-laws had given him just in case, shortly before the tragedy. Curiously, Robert never mentioned this during interrogations, and Kathy was unaware that her brother had given her husband a key. Brenda unknowingly revealed this crucial detail to the investigators. Further investigation revealed that Robert's claim of being a successful ENT doctor was a facade. While he did possess a medical degree, he never held a stable job in the field. Rumors suggested he fled to Australia to avoid punishment for alleged bribery charges in China. In Australia, Robert failed to establish himself professionally, squandering the last of his savings on unsuccessful business ventures. After moving to North Keeping, he became essentially idle, relying on his wife's income and occasional financial assistance from Kathy's relatives. Once the guardianship papers for Brenda were finalized, Robert acted as if he had inherited the Lynn family's estate. His first move was to force Lynn's parents out of the house that Min had bought for them, though it was legally under the deceased name. Even though Min and Kathy's parents remained in the house bought for them, considering these facts and circumstances, investigators theorized that Robert was driven by intense envy of his wife's more successful and wealthy relatives, harboring a long-standing plan to seize their property, money, and lucrative business. Despite living under the same roof as the perpetrator of the crime against her family, Brenda and Kathy weren't considered in immediate danger. Brenda was oblivious to the true nature of her cohabitant, while Kathy was needed by Robert to maintain control over the family's assets. However, the police couldn't arrest Robert yet due to lack of concrete evidence against him. Interrogation, surveillance, and arrest. The investigation team obtained permission to install several hidden cameras in the Robert household, hoping to gather the evidence needed to prove Robert's guilt. The breakthrough came sooner than expected, starting with an unsuspecting revelation by Kathy during an interrogation. Kathy mentioned her husband's preference for a particular brand of shoes a few years back. Robert had purchased 2 pairs of sneakers from a limited edition series that he particularly liked. He had worn out and discarded one pair, but the other was still carefully stored in its box at their home. Notably, Robert wore size 9.5 shoes, the same size as the killer's. The key evidence came when Robert was captured on one of the hidden cameras, meticulously destroying the box of the aforementioned shoes. This footage led to a warrant to search the suspect's home, where a new pair of size 9.5 sneakers was found. The tread pattern on these shoes matched the prints found at the crime scene. Additionally, a small smeared trace resembling blood was discovered in his garage. Forensic analysis confirmed that it was indeed a blood stain containing the DNA of all 5 Lynn family victims, literally linking it to the crime scene. This evidence led to Robert's arrest, finally providing the concrete proof the police needed to take action. During the trial, shocking revelations emerged. Robert vehemently denied any involvement, claiming the blood found in his garage appeared after their return from the Lynn house. He also dismissed the significance of the sneakers with matching tread patterns found in his possession, asserting they were brand new and that he had immediately disposed of the old pair. While awaiting trial in prison for 3 years, Robert unknowingly shared cells with several informants. In one such conversation, he confessed to meticulously planning the crime and carefully covering his tracks. He mentioned buying the lethal weapon in a remote store without surveillance cameras and drugging his wife with sedatives in tea to prevent her from waking up and noticing his absence. He disposed of the hammer, sneakers, gloves, and clothing in a manner that ensured they would never be found. At the trial, Robert denied everything, and the only evidence against him were the statements from his cellmates and the previously mentioned indirect evidence. As a result, the jury couldn't reach a unanimous verdict, and Robert was released on bail in December 2015. The trial resumed in June 2016 with testimony from another informant who claimed Robert confessed to an obsession with Brenda since she was 13. This led to a re-examination of Brenda, who tearfully admitted that Robert had coerced her into a sexual relationship shortly after she started living with them. Fearing retaliation, she had remained silent about the abuse for years. With these revelations and considering other evidence, Robert was found guilty on all charges. He received 5 life sentences, 1 for each fatal crime without the possibility of parole. All his subsequent appeals were rejected. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Kelly Cochran. Christopher Reagan was born in Detroit, Michigan, where he spent his formative years and received his education. At the age of 20, he made the decision to join the military, driven by a desire to defend his country. Christopher discovered his true calling and committed himself wholeheartedly to serving his nation with honor and unwavering dedication. As a guardian of the citizens' peace, this decision influenced the course of his life. Christopher was sent to a military base near the town of Marquette. There, on the military base not far from Marquette, fate brought Christopher together with Terry, a young teacher from the town of Iron River. Recalling their acquaintance, Terry told the detective how, being young, they would see each other, and a mutual attraction arose at first sight. The young people often met on the streets of the city and felt too shy to greet each other, but over time, they began to walk together. Their communication became more and more frequent and intimate, and eventually it grew into a close friendship. For several years, they remained only close friends because Christopher's military service did not allow him to pursue a serious relationship. At some point, Chris decided to leave the military service and move to Traverse City, a city located in the same state but far from the place where his beloved lived. However, the distance did not become a barrier to their feelings. On the contrary, communication between them became even closer. In December 2012, Christopher proposed to Terry to start a long-distance romantic relationship. Both were single at that moment, knew each other for many years, and always maintained a proper relationship. After a short period, the lovers recognized that they shared numerous common interests: a deep appreciation for nature, a preference for a balanced lifestyle, and a yearning for serenity. This is why Iron River proved to be the ideal location for both of them. The couple reached the decision to cohabitate. Christopher relocated to live with Terry, secured employment at a factory manufacturing components for naval vessels, and before long, had subordinates reporting to him. Life was unfolding in the most favorable manner possible. However, after 2 years of living together, problems began in the relationship between Christopher and Terry, and the passion gradually faded. As they did not try to overcome the difficulties of this difficult period, it became obvious that they would not be able to keep their connection. Eventually, they made the difficult decision to part ways. The parting was peaceful, and the former lovers managed to maintain friendly relations. After breaking up with Terry, Christopher could no longer continue his life in her house, so he decided to rent his own place. As time went on, it dawned on him that he wanted to change where he lived as well. Chris began looking for a more dynamic and vibrant city. He responded to job openings in various locations by sending out his resume. In October 2014, fate presented Christopher with the opportunity to start a new chapter in Asheville, North Carolina. Here, he found not only a job but also a cozy place with many picturesque natural attractions. In this new city, Chris was about to begin his life anew. On October 14th, Christopher wrote Terry that he had taken the day off and would be free the next day. The reason was a doctor's appointment, after which he suggested they meet up and go for a walk as they had often done when they still lived together. However, on October 15th, he did not contact his girlfriend. Terry was deeply concerned. She had tried reaching him for several days, and worried, she contacted their shared acquaintances, but they had no information. 10 days later, a distressed Terry filed a missing person report about Christopher's disappearance. The report was registered, but the police swiftly reassured Terry, stating that people occasionally vanish for a time before returning, sometimes even settling in other locations. At the police station, Terry also mentioned that Christopher had recently been offered a job in North Carolina, implying he may have made it to his new residence and chosen to start afresh, cutting ties with the past. To avoid making idle speculations, investigators launched a detailed investigation. They managed to identify the company where Christopher had recently started working and contacted one of the employees to find out what he knew about Christopher. However, surprisingly, no information could be obtained, as Christopher had not shown up for work for 10 days. The police speculated that he might have been the victim of an accident, given his frequent solitary trips outdoors. Search teams ventured into the local woods, trying to check everything on the paths Christopher liked to explore. Specially trained dogs were deployed to assist in the search, but unfortunately, no trace of the missing man was ever found. Terry then suggested a visit to Christopher's former apartment in order to make sure that no accident had happened to him, and perhaps traces could be found there that would indicate his current whereabouts. Agreeing to Terry's suggestion, the investigators went to the home of the missing Christopher. Upon entering the apartment, the detectives were struck by the chaos inside. Items were strewn across the floor, and closets were left open. Their first thought was that Christopher was probably just a sloppy person and had forgotten to clean up. Terry, however, immediately refuted this idea, claiming that her ex-boyfriend was not that sloppy. The detectives began to suspect that the case might be connected to a crime. After inspecting Christopher's home, they decided to start a larger-scale search for him. The police carefully searched the neighborhood and eventually found Reagan's car outside the city limits, about 8 miles from Iron River. It seemed unlikely that he had left his car there intentionally, so they had to break into one of the doors to access the vehicle. The interior contained only ordinary items such as a hat, coat, and gloves, but one of the policemen noticed a small piece of yellow paper on the front passenger seat with a detailed route written on it, though no specific address was provided. The authorities decided to follow the route indicated in the note. Terry explained that despite living in Iron River, Christopher still hadn't learned the names of streets and roads, so he wrote down directions like turning at a bus stop or driving past a gas station. Terry shared that judging from the detailed notes, this was the first time Christopher was headed to this location. The group of detectives followed the route indicated on the piece of paper, which took them to a neighboring town, stopping in front of the house noted in Christopher's notes. The investigators knocked on the door, needing to find out who lived there and why Christopher had traveled that way. The door was opened by Jason Cochran, an overweight man who was surprised to see uniformed men in front of his house. His wife Kelly soon appeared. The officers informed the couple that they were investigating the disappearance of Christopher Reen, and a piece of paper found in his abandoned car pointed to this address. Kelly candidly revealed that she worked with Christopher at the same plant, and they got along well and were even friends. She had not been in contact with him in recent weeks, but in mid-October, she tried to contact Chris via text messages, but received no response and assumed he had gone to North Carolina for a new job. Kelly also mentioned that Christopher had been having health issues and may have just decided to start a new life. The investigators found themselves in a quandary. They did not understand why the route that led to the Cochran home was written down on a piece of paper found in the missing man's car. Despite the lack of answers, the couple expressed their willingness to cooperate with the investigation. After a brief questioning, without getting the information they needed, the detectives left their home. The next phase of the investigation involved interviewing Christopher's co-workers. The detectives visited the factory, where they spoke with employees and supervisors. One of the supervisors revealed that Christopher was having an affair with Kelly Cochran, and rumors about this had been circulating for months. This new information piqued the investigators' interest, and they decided to re-interview the Cochran couple to clarify the nature of their relationship. Ultimately, Kelly admitted that she and Christopher had indeed been involved in an affair, but she was unable to disclose this previously due to her husband's presence. She explained that she and her husband Jason have an open relationship, and Jason is generally accepting of his wife's affairs. However, the topic was sensitive, and it may have hurt his feelings. Christopher's co-workers disputed Kelly's claims, stating that Jason was strongly opposed to the affair, and there was no casual relationship in the Cochran family as Kelly had suggested. Jason himself had a conversation with the police that revealed he was vehemently against his spouse's unfaithfulness, though this stance made him a suspect. However, the lack of decisive evidence made it impossible to determine that he was involved in Christopher's disappearance, and the officers had no choice but to release Kelly and Jason from the police station. The investigation dragged on for 5 long months, and the mysterious case remained unsolved. On March 5, 2015, the case was placed in the hands of a new investigator, Jeremy Ogden, who immediately began actively working on it. Ogden's initial task was to thoroughly analyze the Cochran family's history. He learned that Kelly had met Jason while still in high school, and they began living together immediately after graduation. The two had very different personalities. Kelly was socially adept and loved to talk, while Jason was known for his reticence and taciturnity, only answering questions when asked. Despite these differences, the couple decided to get married and started their own company providing swimming pool maintenance services. The business was modest but brought them a decent income, with most of the work taken on by Jason. The constant stress and strain took a toll on his health, and he began to have back problems, feeling heavier and heavier every day. Eventually, he realized he was unable to continue the business, and Kelly took over all the work of running it. During this challenging time, Kelly sought ways to help her husband recover, and she discovered a plant that offered hope for Jason's recovery. However, the use of this plant in medical practice had just begun, and it was prohibited in the state where they resided. The only option for Kelly and Jason to obtain the drug was to relocate, and they decided to move to Iron River Township, Michigan in 2014. Here, Jason was able to consult a doctor and receive a prescription for the remarkable plant, ultimately finding relief from his suffering. In early 2014, the couple found employment at a plant that specialized in manufacturing parts for U.S. warships, where they worked alongside Christopher. Kelly made every effort to ensure her family's financial well-being, and she and Christopher became close friends, which was particularly important for Christopher, who had been having difficulties in his relationship with Terry. The investigation continued, and after reviewing the evidence, the prosecutor made a strong case for a search warrant of the Cochrans' home. The search uncovered a disturbing book by Jason describing murder scenes, one matching Christopher's characteristics. Suspicions about Jason grew, leading to another search, but the home was empty when police arrived. No one opened the door, and it turned out that immediately after the initial search, Kelly and Jason had left town and moved to another state, Indiana. Their quick getaway had investigators worried, as they feared they might not be able to find the crucial evidence they had been hunting for months. It was especially important to collect DNA samples from the suspects. That's when Michigan police officers contacted their Indiana counterparts, asking them to take DNA samples. The Indiana police officers headed to the Cochrans' new home, and the couple did not object at all to the procedure, as there was no legitimate reason to charge them with murder, nor was there any evidence of the victim's body itself. The investigation was gradually losing steam, leaving less and less chance of solving the disappearance of Christopher. Time passed, and suddenly, on February 22, 2016, a call rang out at the police station in Hobart, Indiana. On the other end of the line was a worried Kelly Cochran. She tried to explain that her husband, Jason, was not breathing, but in her state of panic and emotional shock, it was difficult to provide specific details. Rescuers arrived to find Kelly in a panicked state, obstructing doctors. Jason was discovered dead, his face suggesting extreme overheating. Investigators uncovered a syringe at the home, but the forensic report revealed Jason's death was by strangulation, not drug abuse. This led to a re-examination of the evidence, with Kelly becoming the prime suspect in both her husband's murder and the disappearance of Christopher Reen. On February 23, 2016, Kelly Cochran was invited to the police station to testify in Jason's murder case. During the interrogation, the investigators asked her directly about her involvement in her husband's death and whether she had administered excessive doses of illegal drugs to him. Despite the lack of concrete evidence and pressure from the investigators, The young woman did not confess to either the murder of her husband or the kidnapping of Christopher. Several months later, investigators have not been able to find convincing evidence of Kelly's guilt, as well as the grounds for a possible arrest. During the investigation, Detective Jeremy Ogden met Walter Hammerman, a close friend of Jason's. After learning about the tragic incident from Kelly herself, Walter quickly went to the police. He emphasized that illegal drugs could not have caused Jason's death, as he knew his friend well, and Jason would have told him about any changes in his life. Additionally, Jason had been using only medicinal herbs to alleviate the persistent back pain he had been experiencing for a long time. However, Walter noticed that his friend had been going through a difficult situation lately. In March last year, Jason shared his concerns with him, stating that he and Kelly had to travel to Indiana due to suspicions from the Iron River police regarding their involvement in the disappearance of a man. Everything that had occurred had significantly affected Jason. He had even become depressed and attempted to take his own life, which necessitated intensive treatment. Walter also observed a noticeable change in his friend's conduct. Kelly started to exert more and more control over his life, and it seemed that Jason was continuously on edge, whereas previously, the boys could spend hours playing video games together. Jason now began to avoid social gatherings as soon as his wife returned from work. This information became a crucial piece in the investigation and enabled the investigators to comprehend the dynamics within the Cochran family. After the medical examiner determined that Jason had died from strangulation, Detective Ogden began to devise a cunning plan to force Kelly to tell the truth about the fate of Christopher Reen. It was decided to use Walter, Jason's close friend, as bait to lure Kelly into a trap and force her to make a mistake. While Walter accepted a difficult role, he was to become a tool in the hands of the investigation and play out a performance in front of Kelly Cochran. On March 12, 2016, he called Kelly while under the watchful eye of police officers equipped with a listening device. He was to give Kelly a fictitious letter from Jason that supposedly contained something important. Walter also told Kelly that her husband had given the letter to her shortly before his death, with the condition that he not open the envelope and immediately send it to the police if anything happened to him. Suddenly, Kelly asked Walter to drop the idea, which came as a real shock to both Walter and the police officers who had been monitoring the situation. Despite this revelation, detectives still had no direct evidence. In the weeks that followed, Kelly was subjected to numerous interrogations by investigators in an attempt to get the truth out of her, but she continued to deny her guilt. On April 26, 2016, it suddenly became clear that Kelly Cochran had managed to slip away from the scrutiny of investigators, mocking the justice system. Detectives immediately joined forces with police officers from Iron River and Hobart, announcing a federal manhunt for Kelly Cochran. Walter Hammerman, who cooperated with the police, was shocked and frightened. He feared that the perpetrator would never be found and that she could once again get away with it and might later attempt to attack him. Kelly's phone was off, as if she was enjoying a game of cat and mouse with the cops. After 2 hectic days filled with unease and upheaval, Detective Jeremy Ogden managed to uncover the information that Kelly Cochran was located off the west coast of the United States. She had skillfully evaded the police and traveled to Kentucky, specifically to the town of Wingo, which is situated more than 6 hours away from Hobart. A detective notified the local law enforcement, advising that upon locating Kelly, they should apprehend her, exercising utmost caution due to her potential threat. On April 28th, police officers located Kelly at her cousin's home. The arrest team, responding quickly to the information, proceeded to the house, knowing that Kelly could be dangerous and prone to escape attempts. They acted quickly and without warning, and that afternoon, Kelly was apprehended and taken into custody. Detective Ogden arrived in Wingo, where he continued interviewing the suspect, along with investigators from Indiana and Michigan. After speaking with Kelly Cochran, the details became clear. The story of her relationship with Christopher Reen was much more complex and significant than everyone had initially believed. She genuinely loved him, and Kelly longed to escape this city and build a new life with him. However, everything changed on October 13, 2015, when Jason discovered her infidelity. They were fighting, and Jason remembered the pact the newlyweds made on their wedding night. According to that pact, the cheater was obligated to kill his lover if his cheating became known to his other half. Kelly claimed that she had never taken that agreement seriously. She thought it was a joke, but Jason was serious and warned her that he would do it himself if she didn't keep her vow. Kelly didn't want to take that responsibility, but she helped Jason commit this horrible crime. On the evening of October 14, 2015, Christopher Reen arrived at the home of his mistress, Kelly Cochran. It was a moment he wanted to enjoy, as their encounter was while Kelly's husband was away. The young woman offered him dinner, then a pleasant time and intimacy. Everything was going according to plan, and their evening promised to be special. But their solitude was interrupted by Jason's sudden appearance. He burst into the bedroom with a rifle in his hands. Panicked and terrified, Christopher realized he was in a death trap. Jason, without hesitation, took aim and fired a shot at Christopher's head. The bullet mortally wounded him, and Chris died on the spot. Afterward, under Jason's direction, the accomplices dragged the body into the basement and began dismembering it using a hacksaw. Christopher's limbs and head were detached from the torso, and the remains were placed in several trash bags and then disposed of by dumping them in the woods near the village of Crystal Falls. They drove Christopher's car away from the house to ward off suspicion. The couple thoroughly cleaned the house to remove evidence of the crime. The couple were accomplices to a terrible crime. Kelly Cochran also did not hide her participation in the tragic death of her husband. According to her, the idea of revenge was born when Jason, having discovered that Kelly had a lover, decided to commit the crime. Kelly, in turn, wanted to get back at him for the loss of happiness with the man she loved. She confessed that she was deeply in love with Christopher and felt that her spouse deprived her of the opportunity to be happy. She never could come to terms with the loss and the pain she felt on a daily basis. Kelly hated her husband for what he had forced her to do and realized she couldn't continue to live peacefully with it. The opportunity for a crime came on February 22, 2016, when Jason complained of back pain. Kelly talked him into giving him a shot with a medication. The dose of the medication was too high, but for some reason, it didn't work properly. Seeing that her husband was still breathing, Kelly suffocated Jason by covering his mouth and nose with her hands. Later, just in case, Kelly squeezed his neck to make sure her husband was already dead. This explained the appearance of bruises on the victim's body. After Kelly Cochran's testimony, she actively cooperated with the police to help determine where Christopher's remains were buried. On May 18, 2016, Detective Jeremy Ogden, along with a team of investigators and a canine team, went to a site near the village of Crystal Falls. This seldom visited neighborhood had become the hiding place of a terrible mystery. The team of investigators began a thorough sweep of the woods around the lake, each member carefully penetrating between the trees. One of the canine dogs suddenly detected a faint odor and led the officers forward. All the other officers followed the dog tensely, expecting the reveal to be close. The dog led the group to an unassuming hill, littered with fallen leaves and branches. Clearing it, the investigators found objects, one of which was unmistakably a human skull. Upon closer examination, it was obvious that the victim had been murdered. The bullet hole spoke for itself. Investigators had no doubt that they had discovered Christopher's severed head. Also found at the scene was a .22 caliber bullet, a broken gun, and glasses that probably belonged to Reagan. Dental records were used to identify the victim's remains. The missing person case that had plagued investigators for 2 years was finally solved. In April 2016, Kelly Cochran was formally charged with the murders of Christopher Reen and Jason Cochran. On February 13, 2017, the 34-year-old criminal was arraigned in Michigan State Court. The prosecutor emphasized that Kelly significantly diminishes her role by being the mastermind behind both crimes. He argued that Christopher viewed his relationship with Kelly as an occasional encounter, while she genuinely loved him and planned a future with him. Christopher's refusal to have a serious relationship with her led to rage, and Kelly decided to kill him by making up a story about a pact with her husband. The prosecution had strong evidence, including Kelly's confession in court. However, she presented a different version, according to which she was being abused by her jealous husband, who arranged the crime. He hid in the basement that day, caught the lovers off guard, and then grabbed a gun in a rage and shot Christopher. The idea of dismembering the body was Jason's suggestion, and he coerced Kelly into helping by threatening to kill him. The new version made the jury wonder about Kelly's guilt. They deliberated for 3 hours and still reached their verdict. Kelly was found guilty of the premeditated murder of Christopher Reen. She was given a life sentence without parole. Jason Cochran's case did not go to trial as a plea agreement was reached, and Kelly was sentenced to 65 years in prison. From the courtroom, Kelly Cochran was sent straight to Crown Point Correctional Facility in Ypsilanti, Michigan, where she is serving her sentence. Within the prison walls, Kelly continues to reveal details of her crimes. She claims that she and Jason committed more crimes, and Christopher is just one of their many victims. However, the details, names, and additional crimes that Kelly does not disclose make it difficult to corroborate her words. Kelly's brother has also heard from her that there were more victims, but there is no concrete evidence to back that up at this time. Detective Jeremy Ogden of the Hobart, Indiana Police Department is scrutinizing the details, hoping to uncover some clues and find evidence of other possible crimes committed by Kelly and Jason Cochran, in the hope that this additional evidence will help close a chapter in this dark story. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Elizabeth Arellano. In the spring of 2016, in the peaceful town of Fort Worth, there was a brutal and cynical murder that even surprised the most experienced investigators. The victim of the crime was a young mother of many children named Elizabeth Poulet Arellano, who worked as a paramedic. It is shocking to discover who her executioner was. The circumstances surrounding the tragic incident were quite puzzling, leading the police to initially consider the possibility that Elizabeth may have passed away of her own volition. However, this theory was contradicted by the accounts provided by accidental witnesses who observed the horrific scene. The investigation required extensive efforts to thoroughly understand the events and bring the perpetrator to justice. Despite the brutality of the crime committed, many felt that the sentence imposed was overly lenient and unjust. Elizabeth Poulet Arellano was born on August 16, 1987, in the American city of Fort Worth, Texas, where she was destined to live all her short life. She grew up with her two sisters, Alessandra and Giovanna, with whom she was always practically inseparable. Elizabeth's birth father left the family when she was very young and showed no interest in the fate of his daughter, not contacting her in any way. Soon, her mother Juanita remarried a man named Fidel, who adopted her children and treated them as his own. Elizabeth had a very warm relationship with her stepfather, who supported and helped her in everything. She studied diligently at school and dreamed of one day becoming a doctor. In high school, she met a man named Rudolph Arellano, with whom she soon entered a romantic relationship. The young man was almost 8 years older than her, which somewhat embarrassed Elizabeth's parents. But they did not interfere with their romance, because the chosen partner seemed to them a serious and quite reliable man. At the age of 16, shortly after finishing school, Elizabeth married her partner. Legally, the couple had 4 children, one after the other, 3 sons and a daughter. However, despite the presence of multiple heirs, Elizabeth did not intend to become a homemaker. She recalled her childhood aspiration, so Elizabeth completed medical school and secured employment as a paramedic, with the intention of pursuing further education to become a physician. The young woman was kind and devout, raised in the Christian faith. She took her children to church regularly, instilling in them a love and compassion for their fellow human beings. Family and friends described her as a very caring person, always willing to lend a helping hand. From the outside, their marriage with Rudolph appeared strong and happy, but after 13 years of living together, this union began to show signs of strain. Rudolph had been jealous of his young wife earlier, trying to control every aspect of her life, but over time, his behavior became simply intolerable. In the spring of 2016, Elizabeth, after another jealousy scene organized by her husband, took the children and moved to her parents' house. Rudolph made an attempt to reconcile with his wife, but the young woman was tired of tolerating his outbursts of anger. Additionally, she did not want the children to listen to their parents' arguments almost every day, so she gathered her courage and officially filed for divorce. A few days after Elizabeth took the children and filed for divorce, she mysteriously disappeared. According to friends and family, she was in good spirits and, in order to distract herself from family problems and the impending divorce, decided after work to go with colleagues to a local club. So on the evening of April 15, 2016, the 28-year-old woman, accompanied by her friends, went to a fun place. There she danced and enjoyed herself, but did not consume any alcohol because she intended to drive home in her own car, which she had used to arrive at the club. Elizabeth returned home well past midnight on April 16th. After parking the car, she called her friend with whom she had spent the evening at the club and told her that she had already reached home and was doing fine. Elizabeth then hung up the phone but never went inside the house. The next morning, Juanita, her mother, was very worried when she found that her daughter was not home. She knew that Elizabeth had planned to spend the evening with friends, but her daughter should have returned a long time ago. Elizabeth could not have left somewhere without informing anyone, and besides, her car was parked outside the house, which meant that she had returned from the club. When Juanita approached the car, she found that it was not locked. The key remained in the ignition, and her daughter's purse and phone lay on the vacant seat. Naturally, she could not leave her personal effects unattended in the unlocked vehicle, implying something dreadful had transpired. She promptly contacted the authorities, reporting a missing person. The police were confident they could swiftly resolve the matter, as they say, while fresh. Furthermore, there was still hope Elizabeth was alive, as the car showed no signs of blood or struggle. Yet, the situation was far from straightforward. The investigation started by meticulously reconstructing the timeline of events on the evening and night in question, tracing Elizabeth's entire route to find and question all potential witnesses, beginning with the friends and colleagues she had spent time with before her disappearance. They provided the exact time when she returned home, and later Elizabeth herself had called to confirm her safe arrival. Additionally, several calls and messages from her ex-husband, Rudolph Arellano, who had repeatedly attempted to reach her that night, were found on the missing person's phone, but Elizabeth had not responded to any of them. Police officers went to Rudolph's house to find out where he was and what he was doing the previous evening and night. According to him, he had been in contact with his ex-spouse just the night before, and she had promised that she would bring the children to him for the weekend. But afterward, she stopped answering the phone, and he thought she had changed her mind. As for an alibi, Arellano's alibi was questionable. According to him, he sat with a friend at a local bar that evening, and around midnight, he returned to his home and went to bed. His friend and several other people who had been relaxing at the same establishment on Friday confirmed that Rudolph was indeed there, but where he went afterward, no one could say for sure. He assured that he had gone home, but as he now lived alone, there was no one to confirm this. Thus, the police were not going to exclude Mr. Arellano from the list of suspects. Besides, he didn't seem upset or worried. It was clear that he and Elizabeth were in the process of divorce, but they had been married for many years, and she was the mother of his children, and it was strange that her disappearance had not affected him in any way. On the night of the disappearance of Elizabeth, A fisherman called the emergency services to report a strange incident he had witnessed. He said that he was sitting alone with a fishing rod on a bridge, which is part of an interstate highway, when about 4 o'clock in the morning, he noticed a car drive onto the bridge, stop, and then the driver pulled out something large that looked like a person and threw it into the water. It also appeared to him that something bulky and obviously heavy was tied to this person. Since the fisherman was at a great distance and it was still dark, he could not see details, nor could he see the make and number of the car. In addition, there was a strong wind on the bridge, so he could not hear anything. Soon, another witness was found, walking at night with his dog down by the bridge. He did not see what was happening on the bridge itself, but a heartbreaking scream caught his attention. Then he saw something large flying down from the bridge, followed by a splash, and then silence. Based on the testimony of witnesses, the police decided to examine the bottom of the pond near the bridge. A few hours later, divers came across a body with a massive piece of concrete tied to its neck with a rope. The drowned woman turned out to be the missing Elizabeth Arellano. Had it not been for the testimony of a passerby and a fisherman, her body would probably have been discovered very soon or not found at all, because the tide weight did not allow the body to float. Then, a theory was put forward that the young woman decided to leave her life voluntarily, against the background of problems in the family. But this assumption was untenable, because it did not fit with the testimony of a witness who saw how someone threw her into the water, nor with the words of relatives who assured that Elizabeth made great plans for life and would never do this to her children and parents. Elizabeth was still alive when a piece of concrete was tied to her neck and thrown off the bridge. This was evidenced by the forensic medical results, which showed that the young woman had suffocated, and by the testimony of a man who heard her desperate scream as she flew down the bridge. However, the question remained as to who, and for what reason, could have so brutally murdered a mother of many children. Robbery was not considered because none of Elizabeth's belongings were taken. There were suggestions that the killer could have spotted Elizabeth in the club and then followed her home, or someone could have been guarding her at home, waiting for her to return. The ex-husband of Elizabeth, Rudolph, continued to insist that he was sleeping at his home on the night of the murder and had nothing to do with the crime. However, the investigators were still in no hurry to exclude Rudolph from the list of suspects because he had no alibi, and his behavior raised more and more questions. At the funeral, Rudolph displayed an emotional performance, weeping at the coffin of his ex-wife and expressing a desire to be in her place or die alongside her. According to his sister, Elizabeth, he even believed the sincerity of his own words. Additionally, Rudolph actively assisted in the establishment of a charitable foundation to raise funds for the farewell ceremony for his wife. However, after the funeral, when he was once again called to testify, he already looked and behaved completely different, as if nothing bad had happened in his life. The investigation determined that a car of the same make and color as Rudolph's had driven away from Elizabeth's parents' house around 3 a.m. The neighbor also recalled seeing the car parked on the road near Elizabeth's house, and it was established that the car had subsequently driven towards the very bridge from which she had been thrown. When the investigation requested Rudolph's cell phone data for the night of the crime, the questions became even more complex. It turned out that he made several calls that night, first near Elizabeth's workplace, and then near the home of his mother-in-law and father-in-law. He also sent his ex-wife several messages, trying to find out when she would return, but his messages went unanswered. The police finally had enough evidence to arrest Rudolph as the prime suspect and bring him to the station for further questioning. One of the key witnesses in the case was Elizabeth and Rudolph's eldest son, who stated that he had seen the rope removed from his mother's neck earlier in the backyard of his father's house, and recognized a piece of concrete that had been lying in their garden shortly before. The investigation found that Rudolph waited for his ex-wife at her parents' home and abducted her before she could enter the house. He forced her into his car, in the trunk of which he had already prepared rope and concrete, and then drove to the bridge for the massacre, expecting to go unnoticed. Despite a large amount of evidence and witness testimony proving his guilt, Rudolph denied any involvement in the crime and continued to insist that he was at home that night. Given the brutality of his actions, Rudolph was facing the ultimate penalty of death, and then, on the advice of his lawyer, he decided to confess to everything and cooperate with the investigation to mitigate the sentence. In January 2019, Arellano pleaded guilty in court and detailed how he kidnapped and murdered his ex-wife and the mother of their 4 children. Juanita, who was in the courtroom listening to his story, fainted, and Alessandra and Giovanna called their sister's killer a monster. Rudolph himself, though he admitted his guilt, felt no remorse or pangs of conscience. He spoke differently and coldly about his murder, did not apologize, and did not explain the motive for his terrible act. The court sentenced the murderer to life in prison without parole. Elizabeth's family members, although they considered such a sentence rather mild, noted that they forgive Rudolph because they do not want their hearts to boil with hatred. Her parents and sisters are now responsible for the upbringing of Elizabeth woman's children. Even though Elizabeth is no longer here, everyone in her family and community will always remember her. She was a lovely, lovely mother. I want to say a lovely daughter too. She was basically my daughter. She had the ultimate respect for me, as I did for her, said her stepfather Fidel Galvan in 2016. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Rebecca Payne. In Massachusetts on May 20th, 2008, at 6:30 a.m., the Boston police received a panicked call from the manager of the Parker Hill Apartments complex. The manager was extremely distraught, reporting that he had found a door ajar on the 3rd floor, belonging to 22-year-old student Rebecca Payne. When he knocked on the door and called out her name, he received no response. This prompted him to enter the apartment, where he was met with a disturbing sight: dark red spots and streaks on the floor, leading him to one of the rooms. Inside, he found Rebecca's lifeless body, with her belongings scattered everywhere. The state of the room strongly suggested that her killer had been searching for something in her apartment. Rebecca Charlotte Payne was born on April 19th, 1986, in New Milford, Connecticut, to Virginia and Nicholas Payne. She attended New Milford High School, where she excelled in sports, particularly field hockey, track, and tennis, before graduating in 2004. Rebecca then pursued a 5-year program in athletic training at Northeastern University in Boston, focusing on the care and prevention of athletic injuries. During her 4th year, she served on the Dean's Council and as president of the Athletic Training Club, playing a key role in organizing the university's Vision for the Future Athletic Training Leadership Forum. Additionally, she was involved with the Episcopal Lutheran Center. Known for her ability to connect with people from all walks of life, Rebecca had a large circle of friends and was always willing to lend a helping hand to those in need. When Rebecca was found dead in May 2008, her friends were shocked and couldn't comprehend who could have committed such a heinous act. The police investigation began when they arrived at the crime scene, and they quickly noticed that the front door showed no signs of forced entry. This led them to suspect that Rebecca might have known her killer, possibly even letting them into her apartment voluntarily. The apartment, situated on the 3rd floor, consisted of 2 bedrooms. In one of the bedrooms, Rebecca's lifeless body was found lying face down on the floor. The trail of blood from the living room to the bedroom where Rebecca lay suggested that the attack had begun in the living room. Further evidence, including casings found at the scene, supported this theory. Forensic examination revealed that Rebecca had been shot 5 times. The bloodstains in the apartment indicated that, although severely injured, Rebecca was conscious for a while and managed to crawl to the bedroom. However, she ultimately succumbed to her injuries there, exhausted and drained of her strength. The detectives sought to identify who could have perpetrated such cruelty against her. The police quickly dismissed the possibility that the incident was a botched theft, given that her valuables remained untouched. Although the apartment was in disarray, detectives believed the perpetrator intentionally created the mess to mislead them. However, it was also plausible that the disarray resulted from Rebecca's attempts to resist and fight for her life. When the investigators examined the apartment, they found that the balcony door was open, just like the front door. The second bedroom showed signs that someone had been living there too. The identity of this person needed to be determined, as they could be the one who took Rebecca's life. Alternatively, if they weren't involved, they had to be ruled out as a suspect. After speaking with the manager, the detectives discovered that Rebecca didn't live alone. She shared an apartment with a fellow student. The police immediately began searching for this roommate. Meanwhile, they interviewed all residents of Parker Hill Apartments. The brutal murder of Rebecca, who had been shot 5 times, would have certainly generated significant noise. It was astonishing to the officers that multiple residents of the apartment complex reported hearing a woman's screams and gunfire between 3 and 4 a.m. Yet sadly, no one took the initiative to contact the police. It seemed that each individual assumed someone else would take responsibility and make the call. In psychology, the phenomenon where individuals are less likely to assist someone in distress when others are present is known as the bystander effect, or Genovese syndrome. This social psychological theory suggests that the presence of other people can inhibit an individual's willingness to help a victim. The term Genovese syndrome originates from a tragic incident that occurred on March 13, 1964, when 28-year-old Kitty Genovese was brutally murdered outside her apartment building in Kew Gardens, Queens, New York City. Although it was initially reported that 38 witnesses witnessed or heard the attack without calling the police or providing assistance, this portrayal has since been disputed as inaccurate. The case of Rebecca Payne led to an investigation into the social psychological phenomenon known as the bystander effect, or Genovese syndrome. What's truly shocking is that, unlike in the widely reported Kitty Genovese incident, Rebecca's neighbors actually did hear her screams and the sound of gunshots, yet still failed to call 911. This tragic event was a devastating loss for Rebecca's parents. They described their daughter as a driven and compassionate young woman who was loved by her friends. Rebecca was the kind of person who always put others first, giving selflessly from the heart. During the investigation, police interviewed a resident who lived on the first floor of the apartment complex where the crime took place. He reported seeing a black SUV approach the building at night, but due to the darkness, he was unable to make out the license plate or identify anyone getting out of the vehicle. The apartment building was equipped with surveillance cameras both inside and outside, which investigators hoped would provide crucial evidence. However, it emerged that the CCTV footage could only be viewed in real time, and recording it required inserting a video cassette into a VCR and pressing the record button, a step that unfortunately wasn't taken. Considering this information and the fact that the residential complex's manager discovered Rebecca's body, investigators began to suspect him of committing the crime. As a resident of the building, he had unrestricted access to Rebecca's apartment at all times. Furthermore, he was aware that no one monitored the surveillance cameras, which might have led him to wait until late at night to attack Rebecca for unknown reasons. The police sought to explore all possible scenarios. The police investigation into the manager gathered pace when they conducted a background check on him, which revealed a history of legal issues related to illegal substances. Furthermore, a thorough search of his apartment by the police turned up additional evidence. An officer noticed several dark red stains on the front door. The stains were swabbed by forensic experts and sent for further analysis. The apartment complex manager was taken in for police questioning. Investigators grilled him with questions, trying to determine if he was concealing information or would alter his story. However, he denied any involvement in Rebecca Payne's death, stating that he was in his apartment the entire night with his wife. The investigators then spoke with his wife, who corroborated her husband's alibi, confirming that he had indeed spent the entire night with her. The police released the suspect after a laboratory report confirmed the dark red stains on his apartment door were just paint, eliminating grounds for his arrest. During their investigation, detectives reviewed video and photo evidence from the scene, which led them to focus on a public transportation card. This card, used in the Boston area, stores data on each use, including the exact location and time. The transit police provided detectives with CCTV footage, which showed Rebecca using the card on her way home, appearing calm and alone, with no one following her. Unfortunately, this footage did not help identify any potential suspects. A few days later, investigators obtained another surveillance video from a camera outside the hospital building near the Parker Hill apartments. The recording showed a black SUV passing by around the same time as the attack on Rebecca. The vehicle matched the witness's description, but the poor quality of the footage made it impossible to read the license plates. However, investigators were able to conclude that the car was a Ford. After identifying Rebecca's roommate, the detectives brought her in for questioning to determine if she had any connection to the incident. They wanted to know if she had any information about the events surrounding Rebecca's death. The roommate claimed to be shocked by the news and explained that she had moved back in with her parents to study for an exam. When her parents corroborated her alibi, she was cleared as a suspect. Although the conversation didn't reveal any direct evidence, the roommate did provide a useful lead. She mentioned that Rebecca's boyfriend, Matt, also a fellow student, had access to their apartment. Matt's motive for taking Rebecca's life was a crucial question investigators had to answer. They reached out to Matt by phone and learned he had moved to New York State to live with his parents around the time Rebecca was attacked. Matt claimed to be depressed over his girlfriend's death, but his distress might have been an act. Matt said he was staying with his parents, and they corroborated his alibi when shown a printout of his cell phone's call history. Investigators discovered Matt had spoken to Rebecca around midnight, mere hours before her death. However, the cell tower that received the signal from Matt's phone was located near his parents' house in New York State. Through an experiment, investigators determined that Matt wouldn't have had enough time to drive from his parents' house to Boston in 3 or 4 hours to commit the crime. As a result, Matt was also cleared from the list of suspects. Family and friends were gathered at Rebecca's home in Connecticut, bidding her a final farewell. But the police investigation had stalled due to a lack of evidence, new witnesses, and DNA samples. The case had reached a dead end. Nicholas Payne expressed the sentiments of those who loved her. "We're left to mourn the loss of Rebecca, knowing we'll never again hear her laughter or share in her life's adventures and progress. All of that has been taken from us." As the years went by, Rebecca's parents continued to wait in vain for answers about their daughter's death, which remained a mystery. However, a surprising breakthrough occurred in 2012. Anthony White, a man, was arrested by the Boston police for dealing illegal substances. With the threat of a lengthy prison sentence looming, White proposed a deal to the investigators. In exchange for a shorter sentence, he would provide information about the night Rebecca Payne died. Recognizing this as a potential opportunity to finally crack the long-dormant case, the investigators accepted White's offer. After consulting with the prosecutor, White reported that on May 20th, 2008, he received a contact from an acquaintance, Cornell Smith, who was also involved in illegal drug dealing. Smith requested a meeting with White and arrived accompanied by their mutual friend, Michael Balba, who drove a black SUV. The three of them proceeded to the Parker Hill apartments, where Balba parked his vehicle to observe the activities taking place inside. According to White, Cornell Smith spotted Rebecca in a third-floor window and exclaimed, "That's her." They waited until the lights in Rebecca's apartment went dark. Then Smith climbed from the first-floor balcony to the second and finally the third floor. Since the balcony door was open, he entered the apartment. However, Rebecca wasn't asleep. Instead, she was lying on the living room couch. When she saw the intruder, she began screaming, and a brief struggle followed. Smith then fired 5 shots at her and exited through the front door, after which they drove away. The investigators were skeptical of White's testimony, believing he had made up the story to get a shorter prison sentence. They couldn't figure out why Cornell Smith would want to kill Rebecca, who was not involved in his world in any way. What White said next shocked and disturbed the officers greatly. According to him, Rebecca's death was a tragic case of mistaken identity. 2 sisters, who closely resembled each other, lived on the first floor of the Parker Hill apartments, and one of them bore a striking similarity to Rebecca. These sisters were not only rivals of Smith's, but also involved in the illegal drug trade. Smith believed he had been wrongly arrested due to their illicit activities and sought revenge. Although he knew they resided in the Parker Hill apartments, he was unaware of their specific floor or apartment number. When he spotted Rebecca in the window, he mistakenly identified her as one of the sisters he sought to harm. Investigators determined that Cornell Smith had been arrested in February 2008 for illegally selling drugs, but he was freed on bail just before Rebecca's death occurred. He subsequently sought revenge against the sisters, whom he mistakenly blamed for his arrest. By 2012, Anthony White had shared his information with investigators, but Cornell Smith was already serving a 12-year sentence for selling illegal drugs, a conviction he received 2 years prior. Following White's testimony, Smith was subsequently charged with Rebecca's murder, despite his denial of any involvement. However, before Smith's court appearance, the prosecution team received a severe blow. Their key witness, Anthony White, had died in prison. This was a significant setback because, aside from White's testimony, there was no physical evidence directly linking Smith to Rebecca Payne's apartment. Hoping to finally bring Cornell Smith to justice, investigators pored over his court file on drug trafficking and were shocked to discover incriminating letters he had written to the presiding judge. In these letters, Cornell Smith came across as arrogant, looking down on others. Although some of the letters made no sense, one of them contained a crucial piece of evidence that would ultimately be his downfall. It's noteworthy that it's unclear why these letters went unnoticed earlier, especially since they were addressed to the judge. In one of the letters, Smith wrote in anger about an earlier altercation that had taken place downtown Boston. This letter described an event that ultimately led to the unfortunate death of Rebecca Payne at the hands of Cornell Allen Smith Sr. Notably, the letter confirmed that Smith was in her apartment at the time of her death. The trial of Cornell Smith took place in 2015. Throughout the proceedings, from the start of the trial to the sentencing, the district attorney maintained that Rebecca Payne was an innocent victim who had no involvement with Smith or Balba. Over the course of the trial, Smith went through 3 lawyers. His first lawyer, Jeffrey Karp, a seasoned defense attorney with over 20 years of experience, withdrew from the case after Smith assaulted him during a preliminary hearing at the Suffolk County Superior Court in Massachusetts. In a shocking and unprovoked attack, Smith suddenly stood up and struck Karp on the head with his handcuffed hand. According to Nicholas Payne, this incident demonstrated the kind of person Smith is. Notwithstanding the assault, Karp declined to press charges against Smith, leaving it to the judge to appoint a new attorney to represent him. Cornell Smith pleaded guilty to the involuntary deprivation of Rebecca Payne's life and was sentenced to serve between 18 and 20 years in prison. Before passing sentence, the judge instructed Smith to turn and face Rebecca's friends and family, telling him that they represented the pain caused by his actions. In memory of Rebecca, her hometown has named its local tennis courts, a garden, and a National Athletic Trainers Association scholarship fund after her. Her father, Nicholas Payne, said they wanted to ensure she would not be forgotten. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case, the case of Fusako Sano. Nobuyuki was born on July 15, 1962, in the Japanese prefecture of Niigata. He grew up in a wealthy family. His family's business, related to passenger transportation, was very successful, thanks to his 62-year-old father. Nobuyuki was a late child, with 5 half-siblings from his father's previous marriage. However, he is not really close to them. As a result, he grew up to be a spoiled and demanding child who always expected to get his own way, immediately. Nobuyuki often becomes aggressive when his expectations are not met in a timely manner. One notable incident occurred. He threw a tantrum in a store, punching his mother when she refused to buy him another toy. Nobuyuki struggled to form relationships with his peers due to his complicated and sometimes unusual behavior. He was also self-conscious about his height, which often caused him to hunch over. This behavior caused his classmates to tease him and give him unflattering nicknames. Despite this, Nobuyuki's family resided in a luxurious 2-story European-style house, which featured a spacious room specifically designed for him. The boy was uncomfortable in the room, fidgeting and expressing fear of being alone. This behavior led his parents to take him to see a doctor. After an initial review, he was referred to a psychiatrist who diagnosed him with multiple disorders, a fear of the dark, a fear of germs and dirt, and a unique of autophobia, fear of loneliness, sociophobia, anxiety related to social interactions. Essentially, he feared both being alone and being around others. As a result, he became a loner in high school, never forming close relationships with classmates, and never having a girlfriend despite his attractive appearance. His peers avoided him, and he became an outcast. The only people he felt comfortable expressing his anger and frustration to were his elderly parents, who forgave him and tried to calm him down with gifts and money. As an adult, he struggled to hold down a job. He frequently got into conflicts with colleagues, neglected his responsibilities, and would often leave work in the middle of the day for no good reason, such as when it was raining and he felt sad. On one occasion, he intentionally hurt a female coworker, likely trying to get her attention out of sympathy. Although the incident was attributed to an accident, he was fired immediately. After being fired, Nobuyuki became unemployed and relied on his parents' financial support. Over time, he became increasingly reclusive, rarely leaving his room, and frequently clashed with his parents. Following a particularly intense quarrel, Nobuyuki started a fire in his home, nearly destroying the house and putting its occupants in harm's way. Nobuyuki was later admitted to a psychiatric clinic for treatment, where he was diagnosed with a depressive disorder, uncontrollable outbursts of aggression, and signs of misogyny, extreme dislike and hatred of women. After a little over a month of treatment, he was discharged, deemed not to pose an immediate threat to others. For a brief period, Nobuyuki remained calm and even began rebuilding the partially burned house, adding a couple of new rooms. However, his efforts were short-lived, and he eventually abandoned the construction project. Nobuyuki became increasingly withdrawn and isolated. He spent most of his time in his room, watching TV. He not only forbade his parents from entering his room, but also the second floor of the house. If they tried to cross this boundary, he would violently lash out at them, punching and threatening to kill them. In the spring of 1989, Nobuyuki began taking walks, but he preferred to stroll near a local school where he could secretly watch the female students. At first, he kept his distance and tried not to communicate with anyone. However, one day, he suddenly grabbed a young girl, who was only 9 years old, and threw her over his shoulder as she was leaving the school gate. He then ran to his car, which was parked nearby. The other children immediately screamed for help, and a school security guard and bystanders quickly intervened, rescuing she and detaining Nobuyuki until the police arrived. Nobuyuki was unable to explain why he attacked she, and it was clear that he had intended to commit a violent and unlawful act against a minor. As a result, he was charged with attempting to commit a violent crime against a child. Nobuyuki Sato avoided a long prison sentence thanks to his father's connections and wealth. In August, Nobuyuki was given a year's probation despite his heinous crime. Shortly thereafter, his name was mysteriously removed from the criminal prosecution database, allegedly due to his father's intervention. However, Nobuyuki's father died shortly after his son's case, dying of a heart attack. Nobuyuki was left with overwhelming shame and guilt for his father's sacrifices and efforts to cover up his crime. After the failure of his first kidnapping attempt, Nobuyuki, 28 years old, tried again a year and a half later. This time, he carefully planned the crime and remained under the police radar for an extended period. On November 13, 1990, Nobuyuki set out on a hunting trip around the city. In the evening, as darkness fell, he spotted 9-year-old Fusako Sano, who had stayed late after school due to a sports event, walking alone on a deserted road. Nobuyuki quickly pulled over in front of her, got out of the car with a knife, and grabbed Fusako. He threatened to slit her throat if she tried to scream or run away. Then, he forced her into the trunk of the car. After driving for a while, he turned into a vacant lot, where he tied Fusako's hands and feet and covered her mouth with tape. When night fell, Nobuyuki drove to his house and took Fusako out of the trunk. Nobuyuki led her through a part of the house that was still under construction to his room, trying not to be seen. He then left the room and re-entered through the front door, as if everything was normal. Once upstairs, Nobuyuki again threatened Fusako with the knife, ordering her to be quiet. He tied her to the bed and warned her that if she tried to leave the room, look out the window, scream, or cry, he would kill her and dispose of her body in the ocean, where no one would ever find it. Fusako was terrified and obeyed the kidnapper's orders, hoping that he would eventually take pity on her and let her go. When Fusako didn't return home from school, her parents started to worry. They knew she had stayed late to watch a baseball game, but as the sun began to set, they expected her to be home by then. Initially, Fusako's parents tried to find their daughter on their own, retracing her usual route from school to home, but their efforts were unsuccessful. As night drew closer, the parents of Fusako turned to the police for help, hoping for a quick resolution. Since Fusako's disappearance, only a few hours had passed, and they were anxious to find her. The police launched a search operation. And by the next morning, they were joined by dozens of volunteers from the local community. The following day, the search party grew to over 200 people, who combed the area, distributed flyers with Fusako's photo, and interviewed passers-by in search of witnesses. Notably, Nobuyuki lived close to Fusako's school and the police station. He had previously attempted to kidnap Fusako, which had brought him to the attention of the police. However, despite this, Nobuyuki was not considered a suspect in the case, thanks to the efforts of his late father. A large-scale search operation was initiated to locate Fusako Sano, a Japanese schoolgirl who had disappeared. The search lasted for many months, covering numerous locations such as empty buildings, houses, railroad cars, and vacant lots. Investigators also searched suspicious vehicles and combed through interstate highways, but found no clues. As the investigation continued, authorities considered various theories, including the possibility of involvement by North Korean special services. However, despite their efforts, the search was unsuccessful, and Fusako remained missing. Fusako later revealed that she was terrified during her captivity and followed Nobuyuki's instructions in the hope that he would eventually release her. However, her captor, Nobuyuki, had no intention of letting her go. For several months, he kept her bound with tight restraints that impaired her blood flow and caused her to lose sensation in her limbs. If she disobeyed or made a sound, he would punish her with a stun gun, beat her, or threaten her with a knife. Notably, Nobuyuki never assaulted Fusako in a sexual manner during her captivity. Instead, he treated her more like a possession or a pet, using her as a means of companionship and conversation. Nobuyuki kept Fusako captive, feeding her a meager diet of food prepared by his mother. As a result, Fusako became severely malnourished and weakened. He restricted her to her bed, forcing her to use plastic bags as a toilet, which he would then dispose of in an unfinished part of the house. Once a month, he would bathe her in a basin, cut her hair and nails, and dress her in his own worn-out clothes. Despite her compliance, Nobuyuki would regularly beat her for his own amusement. Over time, Fusako's spirit was broken, and she became submissive, no longer attempting to escape or even look out the window. As the years passed, Nobuyuki stopped bothering to physically restrain Fusako, and didn't even think to lock the door when he stepped out. He would simply cover her with blankets or towels. Occasionally, he would turn on the radio or watch TV with her, but only to programs that interested him, such as Scottish or sports matches. He also brought her comic books, which he enjoyed himself. These were the only things Fusako had to read during her confinement. For nearly a decade, Fusako was isolated, never speaking to anyone else or leaving her room. She remained in bed most of the time, hardly moving or trying to resist her situation. Fusako had become so resigned to her fate that she no longer attempted to escape or call for help. Nobuyuki's mother lived in fear of her son's violence. For years, she had avoided the second-floor room because Nobuyuki had threatened her with violence. This was not an idle warning, as Nobuyuki actually pushed her down the stairs when she tried to enter the room. She retired in 1996 at the age of 73, and her circumstances became extremely difficult. Nobuyuki regularly abused her, forcing her to follow his rules. Desperate for help, she went to the police in the spring of 1996 and filed a report, stating that she was a victim of domestic violence at the hands of her son. However, the police seemed reluctant to intervene and persuaded her to withdraw her statement, advising her to handle the situation on her own. She also sought help from a public health center, complaining about her son's aggressive behavior and requesting that he be hospitalized for psychiatric evaluation. Her concerns were ignored, and she was told her son's actions were not worth worrying about. Instead, she was advised to encourage him to seek help voluntarily. In January 2000, the elderly woman, exhausted from years of physical and emotional abuse, made a desperate call for help. She contacted the hospital and the police, requesting that they send the medical team and officers to her home. Her reason for calling was that her son, Nobuyuki, had brutally beaten her again, tied her up, and used a taser on her multiple times. Authorities finally responded to she's pleas for help and arrived at her house. When the ambulance and police car appeared, Nobuyuki became visibly agitated, aggressive, and resistant. He had to be restrained with handcuffs and sedated with a large dose of medication. Nobuyuki's mother confessed to the authorities that she lived in fear of her son, whose behavior had become increasingly aggressive and uncontrollable. She also revealed that she had not been allowed to access the second floor of her home for years, as Nobuyuki had forbidden it, threatening to kill her if she disobeyed. Upon entering the second floor and Nobuyuki's room, the police made a shocking discovery. A pile of blankets on the bed moved slightly, and when the officers peeled them back, they found a thin, pale, and exhausted girl hiding underneath. When questioned, she identified herself and revealed that she had been kidnapped by Nobuyuki while walking home from school a long time ago. After the discovery, the police brought Nobuyuki's mother into the room to ask if she knew the captive girl. However, she was shocked and claimed she had no idea that anyone else lived in the house besides her and her son. The kidnapped girl also claimed that she had never seen she before. During questioning, Nobuyuki made a shocking confession. He recalled the day he saw Fusako on the road and thought she was cute, so he decided to take her home with him. According to Nobuyuki, he took care of Fusako, feeding her, washing her, dressing her, and reading her comic books. He only punished her when she disobeyed him. Nobuyuki also admitted that he loved Fusako like a friend and believed she felt the same way about him. He had no intention of letting her go and hoped she would stay with him forever. He enjoyed spending time with her, talking to her for hours about soccer, music, or his favorite comic book characters, and she would listen silently. Nobuyuki claimed that he never locked his bedroom door, but Fusako never tried to escape, which led him to believe that she was happy living with him. A medical examination concluded that despite his mental disorder, Nobuyuki was able to understand his actions and thus was eligible to stand trial. However, questions were raised about whether his mother could be held accountable as an accomplice. She often bought feminine hygiene products for her son, which raised suspicions. Despite her repeated efforts to alert authorities and get medical help for her family, her concerns were consistently disregarded. The case drew widespread attention before the trial even began, the city police facing heavy criticism. Nobuyuki had previously been prosecuted for attempting to kidnap a schoolgirl. But he had managed to avoid suspicion when he carried out his plan. As a result, the local police chief and the head of the regional police department were removed from their posts for failing to control the situation from the start and making numerous mistakes. Nobuyuki Sato went on trial in May 2000. The prosecution thoroughly examined every detail of his actions, including minor offenses. Nobuyuki was found guilty and sentenced to 14 years in prison, the maximum term. He was released in the spring of 2015 after serving his sentence. By then, his mother had passed away in a nursing home, and Nobuyuki had no other relatives. He was found dead about a year and a half later, in early 2017, in a small rented room. The cause of his death was not disclosed. When Fusako was discovered, she was extremely weak and could barely stand. Doctors diagnosed her with exhaustion, dehydration, and muscle atrophy. She also stuttered, was afraid of sunlight, and had lost most of her communication skills. Her parents didn't even recognize their daughter when they saw her after nearly a decade. It took Fusako about a year to recover physically, but her mental health took much longer to heal. She suffered from severe post-traumatic stress disorder and became withdrawn, avoiding people. Her intelligence was also affected, remaining at the level of a 9-10 years old child. Her parents took her out of town, changed her name to Sachiko Yamada, and refused to speak to the press. Over time, Sachiko made friends, took up photography, and even passed her driver's license test. In 2007, a family outing took a devastating turn when her father accidentally drowned in a pond she tragically witnessed. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Wang Nan. Wang Nan, born in 1987 in Nanjing, China, a major city and former capital, Wang Nan grew up in a relatively affluent family. Her parents provided her with the best possible education and encouraged her to develop her talents. After completing her secondary education, Wang Nan enrolled in a prestigious university, where she studied business and finance, and also learned several foreign languages. Upon graduation, she landed a job at a large travel agency, where she quickly proved herself to be a valuable, responsible, and motivated employee. Her career advanced rapidly, and she was soon sent to Thailand to head a new branch and oversee its development. Wang Nan worked as a top manager for several years before deciding to leave the agency to start her own business. She opened a Chinese restaurant in Bangkok, which she managed successfully, and it eventually grew into a small but popular chain. Wang Nan was a thriving young entrepreneur who had devoted her life to her career. With her constant business engagements, she barely had time for socializing or dating, and her loneliness became a normal part of her life. At almost 30 years old, Wang Nan was well established in Thailand, having lived there for a while and become proficient in the language. However, she strived for further improvement, taking additional courses to learn Thai at a training center. There, she met a young man named Yu Xiaodong, who initially stared at her before introducing himself in his native language. They exchanged brief conversations, and he inquired about her reason for studying the language. Wang Nan replied that it was for business purposes, and Yu Xiaodong proposed exchanging business cards to potentially meet up Sunday. Although Wang Nan was not interested in continuing the conversation, she still politely gave him her business card. Yu Xiaodong also gave Wang Nan his own business card, which said that he worked in the import-export industry in Bangkok. Not very impressed, Wang Nan put the business card in her wallet and forgot about it. Yu Xiaodong was the only one who showed genuine interest in Wang Nan, and he wasted no time in calling her the very next day. However, she was preoccupied with work and couldn't spare even a few minutes to talk, so she declined his invitation to meet for coffee. A few days later, Yu Xiaodong asked her out again, but Wang Nan turned him down once more, citing her busy schedule and preparations for an upcoming business conference where she hoped to expand her professional network. Undeterred, Yu Xiaodong showed up at the conference with a stunning bouquet of flowers and waited for Wang Nan to become available. When she was free, he approached her and asked her out once more. This time, Wang Nan was charmed by his persistence, which was a new experience for her. No one had ever pursued her so relentlessly before, so she agreed to meet him for dinner. As it turned out, Yu Xiaodong's interest in Wang Nan was more than just a passing infatuation. He was completely smitten. He showered her with attention, surprise gifts, and romantic gestures, including sending flowers to her doorstep every morning with sweet notes attached. He also called her at least twice a day to wish her good morning and good night. Wang Nan had mixed emotions about the situation. While she was irritated by Yu Xiaodong's all-consuming infatuation, she was also flattered that someone was making such an effort to win her heart. As a result, she found herself unexpectedly entering into a romantic relationship. Yu Xiaodong went out of his way to woo her, not only romantically but also by trying to be perfect in every aspect of their relationship. He shared her interests and opinions, learned to cook her favorite meals, and planned exciting activities for them to enjoy together. He was also eager to help her with her work and household chores at a moment's notice. Wang Nan was over the moon with happiness, feeling as though she was living in a fairy tale. Yu Xiaodong's behavior, however, was moving at a breakneck pace. Despite having only been together for a few months, he was already making plans for their wedding and discussing potential names for their future children. This made Wang Nan uncomfortable, but Yu Xiaodong would counter by pointing out that they were both in their 30s and that it was time for them to start thinking about building a family. That night, Yu Xiaodong wrote a heartfelt letter to Wang Nan, expressing his deep affection and commitment to being a good husband and father. The next morning, he arrived at her doorstep with a bouquet of flowers, reiterating his seriousness about marrying her. Wang Nan jokingly mentioned that the courthouse wouldn't open for another hour and a half, but Yu Xiaodong suggested they go there immediately. To her surprise, the courthouse was open, and the officer responsible for registering marriages was already at his desk, ready to formalize their union. Yu Xiaodong had secretly arranged for a hasty marriage ceremony to take place early in the morning. The whole event was unusual and lacking in formality. There were no guests, no exchange of rings, no wedding dress or veil, and no commemorative photographs. Wang Nan couldn't shake the feeling that the whole thing wasn't really happening, especially since she hadn't even introduced her new husband to her mother, with whom she was extremely close. Before she knew it, she was holding a marriage certificate in her hand, and her newlywed husband was standing beside her, beaming with satisfaction. Wang Nan's marriage was troubled from the start. She had second thoughts about marrying Yu Xiaodong almost immediately after the wedding. Initially, she had hoped he would be a reliable partner, a man she could depend on. Unfortunately, her expectations were not met, and her new husband's true nature soon revealed itself. Yu Xiaodong spent most of his time at home playing video games, using his wife's money without contributing to their household expenses. Whenever his wife asked him why he wasn't working, he claimed his business was slow due to seasonal fluctuations and that he was just taking a break. However, her suspicions grew as time passed, and she decided to investigate his business. Her findings shocked her. His supposedly successful import-export company existed only on paper and business cards. One man was horrified, realizing too late that she should have had a prenuptial agreement. Now, her husband could freely spend her earnings, and if they divorced, he would claim her assets. During a tense conversation, Yu Xiaodong broke down in tears, promising to turn his life around and find a good job. However, it soon became apparent that he had no intention of looking for work and was content to rely on his wife's support. Yu Xiaodong, a grown man, consistently acted like a child. He spent most of his time playing computer games and expected his wife, Wan Nan, to pay for his personal expenses whenever he helped out around the house or assisted her at the restaurant. Wan Nan eventually had enough and told him she would no longer give him money unless he got a job. The next day, Yu Xiaodong disappeared, taking their marriage certificate and Wan Nan's identity card with him. Wan Nan only discovered the missing documents that evening when her accountant called to inquire about a large transfer of funds from her account. She was shocked, as she had not authorized the transfer. However, she immediately suspected her husband's involvement. It turned out that Yu Xiaodong had transferred more than $500,000 into his own account, using the stolen documents to deceive the bank into thinking it was their joint decision to transfer their shared money. Wan Nan quickly reported the theft to the police, who tracked down Yu Xiaodong a few hours later as he attempted to withdraw some of the stolen money. Confronted by the police and his wife, Xiaodong broke down and begged for forgiveness on his knees. He confessed to losing a large sum of money through gambling, which had led to threats of death and demands to repay the debt. This was not his first brush with the law, as he had previously served an 8-year prison sentence for robbery in his home country of China. One man was consumed by shame as she learned the truth about her husband's past. Despite this, she believed that his addiction to gambling was a disease that could be overcome, and she wanted to help him recover and return to a normal life. To support him, Wan Nan agreed to pay off half of his debt and offered him a job as heger of one of her restaurants. Initially, Yu Xiaodong appeared to be grateful for the opportunity and took his new role seriously. He even developed a promising strategy for the restaurant's growth. However, his enthusiasm was short-lived. Before long, he began to spend more time playing computer games and indulging in other leisure activities. Meanwhile, one man discovered she was pregnant and shared the news with her husband. Yu Xiaodong initially expressed reservations about the pregnancy, and in a moment of hesitation, asked his wife to consider an abortion, which she flatly refused. The disagreement escalated to the point where he threatened divorce and division of their property, but eventually, his demeanor softened, and he apologized for his rash words. Yu Xiaodong later admitted that his outburst was driven by emotional anxiety, but ultimately, he was happy about the impending arrival of their child. However, things took a dramatic turn 2 months later. During a fateful trip, Yu Xiaodong suggested that his wife purchase life insurance, citing the pregnancy as a reason to safeguard her well-being and that of their unborn child in the event of any unforeseen circumstances. This seemingly caring gesture came after a period of harmony in their marriage, where he had been attentive, supportive, and diligent in his role as a husband and expectant father. Wan Nan quickly agreed to her husband's suggestion and even wondered why she hadn't thought of it herself. They purchased insurance the very next day. A couple of weeks later, Yu Xiaodong proposed a vacation to help them relax and unwind. One man was initially hesitant, but her husband was insistent. He pointed out that they had never had a honeymoon and that traveling with a baby would be difficult in the coming years. He also felt that they needed a break to clear their minds of the stress and negativity they had been experiencing. Wang Nan was eventually won over by her husband's arguments and agreed to the trip. He took charge of planning the entire vacation, choosing the destination, booking the hotel, and organizing activities that would be enjoyable and educational, yet not too strenuous for Wang Nan's pregnant state. Wang Nan was happy to leave the planning to her husband and was pleased to see how much effort he was putting into making their vacation special. On June 7th, they visited the park for the first time and spent most of the day exploring its many beautiful sights and lookouts. However, as the summer evening wore on, the park became increasingly crowded, with tourists everywhere. As the sun began to set, Wang Nan noticed that her husband, Yu Xiaodong, was growing angry and nervous. When she asked him what was wrong, he explained that the crowds were ruining their chance to enjoy a romantic sunset in peace. Despite his initial frustration, Yu Xiaodong tried to make the most of the situation, suggesting that they could still have a romantic moment as the sun set. As the park began to clear out, he climbed the fence of the observation deck and called out to his wife, Wang Nan, to join him, promising her an incredible view. However, Wang declined, citing the darkness and potential danger. Yu Xiaodong became angry but eventually returned to his wife, suggesting that they should come back to the park another time to watch the sunrise together. The Wang Nan and Yu Xiaodong returned to their hotel late on Saturday night, so they decided to sleep in and head back to the reserve early on Sunday morning. As planned, they woke up at 3 a.m. on June 9th and left for the national park while it was still dark outside. Their goal was to catch the first rays of the rising sun. When they arrived, they found the park nearly empty, with hardly any other visitors. They watched the sunrise together on an observation deck. Then, Yu Xiaodong encouraged his wife, Wang Nan, to join him at the cliff's edge to see some ancient rock paintings. Initially hesitant, Wang Nan trusted her husband's assurance that he would help her climb down and back up safely. As they took in the breathtaking view, Yu Xiaodong suddenly asked Wang Nan if she regretted anything in life. She replied that she did not. However, in a shocking turn of events, Yu Xiaodong's demeanor changed. He touched his wife's hair, kissed her cheek, whispered "die" in her ear, and then pushed her off the cliff. To avoid detection, he checked their surroundings to make sure no one had witnessed the incident. Looking down, he couldn't see where Wang Nan had fallen, and the silence indicated that there were no witnesses below. Yu Xiaodong calmly walked towards the park exit, planning to report the incident after his wife was surely dead. However, hikers who had wandered off the trail spotted Wang Nan's body on the rocks and immediately called for rescue, reporting the incident. As Yu Xiaodong was leaving the reserve, several emergency vehicles sped past him, sirens blaring. Realizing what was happening, he quickly returned to the scene, pretending to be distressed. There, he put on a convincing performance, crying and begging for help. Convinced that his wife was dead and no one would discover the truth, he remained unaware that Wang Nan's fall had been broken by tree branches, which reduced her speed before she landed on bushes and then rolled onto the rocks. This series of events cushioned the impact, saving her life and that of their child, although she suffered severe injuries. Yu Xiaodong was overcome with grief, crying and lamenting the loss of his wife and child. However, his wife suddenly regained consciousness and attempted to speak, but was unable to. The people around her noticed the genuine horror on Yu Xiaodong's face, but he quickly composed himself and leaned in close to his wife. In a hushed tone, he warned her in Chinese to remain silent if she wanted to survive. Wang Nan's injuries were severe, including head trauma, multiple fractures, lacerations, soft tissue contusions, ruptured internal organs, and massive blood loss. Her spine was also severely damaged, leaving doctors concerned that even if she survived, she would likely be paralyzed and never walk again. One man spent several days in a coma, connected to life support machines, during which time her husband remained by her side constantly. However, despite his devoted appearance, Yu Xiaodong's intentions were sinister. Every time he was alone with his wife, he thought about how to complete the job without arousing suspicion. His actions were a ruse, hiding his true intentions behind a mask of love and devotion that he examined the devices, but couldn't find a way to quietly disable them. Wan Nan slowly regained consciousness. When she did, her husband was beside himself with fear. He stayed with her constantly, terrified that she would reveal the truth to the police at any moment. When they were alone, he threatened her again, saying he had nothing to lose. During the initial police interrogation, the Wan Nan supported her husband's claim that her fall was caused by dizziness. However, when her husband briefly left the room, Wan Nan asked the nurse to call the police again and prevent her husband from re-entering. It was then that she recounted the disturbing story of her fall, alleging that her husband had attempted to kill her. Yu Xiaodong suddenly burst into the room, shouting that his wife was delusional due to her head injury and that he would never harm her or their baby. His explanation was not believable, and he was arrested on the same day. At the hospital, he was charged with multiple crimes, including attempted murder and intimidation, after her husband was taken into custody and sent to jail to await trial. Wan Nan finally felt a sense of relief. Although she still had a long and difficult recovery ahead of her, she now felt safe. Wan Nan initially held on to hope that her pregnancy could be saved, despite the severe fall. However, her medical team advised her to terminate the pregnancy due to the large amounts of painkillers and antibiotics she was receiving, as well as the multiple surgeries she underwent under general anesthesia. The doctors prioritized Wan Nan's life, warning her that the fetus was unlikely to survive the strong medications. This news came as a devastating shock to Wan Nan, but she ultimately followed the doctor's advice. During the trial, Yu Xiaodong vehemently denied any wrongdoing, sticking to his claim that the incident was an accident. He remained calm and composed in prison, hiring skilled lawyers and expressing confidence that he would either be acquitted or receive a lenient sentence. In contrast, the investigators and prosecutor were convinced that Yu Xiaodong had deliberately committed the crime. Motivated by the prospect of collecting a substantial insurance payout and inheriting his wife's fortune, which was valued at nearly $2.5 million at the time. During an interrogation, Yu Xiaodong made a shocking revelation about his motive for the heinous crime. He disclosed that he was angry with his wife for not paying off his entire debt, which had accumulated due to his gambling habit. In his mind, if his wife truly loved him, she would have cleared all his debts since she had the financial means to do so. This perceived betrayal led Yu Xiaodong to believe that his wife did not love him, and therefore, he felt justified in punishing her. After making this astonishing confession, the defendant became silent, seemingly aware that he had revealed too much. He attempted to retract his statement, claiming that he had been misunderstood. Nevertheless, his unexpected admission, combined with Wan Nan's testimony, was sufficient to secure a lengthy prison sentence. In March 2021, Yu Xiaodong was found guilty and sentenced to life imprisonment. However, he and his lawyers filed multiple appeals, and 6 months later, the Thai court showed unusual leniency by reducing the life sentence to 10 years in prison. Wan Nan and her family were shocked and outraged by the lenient sentence given to Yu Xiaodong, believing it would set a bad precedent and encourage others to commit similar heinous crimes. Yu Xiaodong received a sentence of 10 years for attempting to murder his pregnant Wan Nan. As of now, Yu Xiaodong is serving her 10-year sentence while Wan Nan is challenging the court's decision. Meanwhile, Yu Xiaodong is filing appeals to prove her innocence. Wan Nan has successfully restarted her business in 2023 and also established an organization that provides support to women who have been affected by domestic violence. She writes about her personal experiences and warnings for women on her blog.